And that's the red light. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Yountville Town Council meeting for Tuesday, April 19th, 2016. Welcome to all of you. I see some faces that we don't always see in the room, so thank you for coming tonight. I would just remind folks, please make sure your cell phones are turned off or to silent so we're not interrupted during our meeting tonight. With that, I will invite our sit-in town clerk and also our finance director, have her call the roll, please.
Councilmember Mueller.
Here.
Councilmember Durham.
Here.
Councilmember Dornbecker.
Here.
The Vice Mayor Hall is excused, and Mayor Dunbar.
Here. Please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we do have some housekeeping work to do right now. So if you have an agenda, you'll notice that we are about to recess from our town council meeting very briefly and remain at the dais as the Yountville Housing Authority. So I'm going to go ahead and recess from our town council meeting and open the special meeting of the Yountville Housing Authority. And I will acknowledge that if we can, Maria, the roll call is that all members are present minus the vice chair, Richard Hall. Now there's an opportunity, if you'd like to address us as the Housing Authority, not the council. This would be a public comment period, so if there's anything that's not on tonight's agenda that you'd like to bring up, I'm thinking no. Seeing none, we'll move right ahead to we have two consent calendar items as the Housing Authority, 4A and 4B. Is there any discussion or is there action on that consent calendar?
So move to approve the consent calendar.
I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. That passes unanimously. We have no other business for this, so I will go ahead and adjourn us out of the Housing Authority and back into the Town Council. And I'll ask for a motion to adopt tonight's agenda as the Town Council.
So moved.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll go right ahead to our proclamation this evening. It is a proclamation declaring April as Sexual Assault Awareness Month in the town of Yountville, and I will invite our representative here from the organization, the Sexual Assault Victim Services Department, to come join me at the podium to receive the proclamation. Welcome.
Thank you.
This is a proclamation declaring April as Sexual Assault Awareness Month. The month of April 2016 is Sexual Assault Awareness Month in California and throughout the United States. This year's campaign is dedicated to sexual violence prevention. It requires many voices and roles when consent is understood and respected, when individuals support change and everyone is involved. Prevention is possible and it starts with you. Whereas Sexual Assault Awareness Month is intended to spread knowledge that sexual violence is a widespread problem, but is preventable. Individuals, communities, and the private sector can all promote the building blocks of prevention, safety, respect, consent, and equality. There is no room for pressure, violence, or control. As individuals, we have a role to promote positive behavior, healthy relationships, and creating safe environment. And whereas prevention is possible when misconceptions are eliminated. To use our voice and share information with communities and organizations, we should serve as leaders in prevention by creating and strengthening safety policies, promoting respect, providing support for survivors, and ensuring they receive appropriate help and connection with resources. Businesses and corporations have an important role in sexual violence prevention by promoting healthy relationships with clients and consumers, promoting positive messages through marketing campaigns, and investing time and funds in programs and organizations working to end sexual violence. Whereas Sexual Assault Victim Services, a program of news, has promoted healthy sexuality and prevention of sexual assault for over 35 years. also provides 24-hour crisis line service to survivors and their significant others, offers education, responds to emergency calls, and offers support and comfort during forensic medical exams, all criminal proceedings. News Sexual Assault Victim Services requests public support throughout Napa County to create a future where women, men, and children can live free from violence and exploitation. With leadership and dedication, we can promote healthy sexuality and prevent sexual violence in the town of Yountville and throughout Napa County. In collaboration with News Sexual Assault Victim Services, we all must work together to increase education, awareness, and community involvement. Together we can all create change and speak out against harmful actions. Prevention is possible. Now therefore be it resolved that I, John F. Dunbar, Mayor of the town of Yountville, do hereby proclaim the month of April 2016 as Sexual Assault Awareness Month in Yountville, and I commend this observance to all of our citizens. So,
Thank you very much.
thank you.
Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you so much for your continued support of News and Sexual Assault Victim Services. We couldn't do it without all of you, the community, the police, the sheriff's department. It truly does take a village. Last year, we had close to 300 clients that we provided services for that were victims of sexual assault. Almost 50% of these are under the age of 18, and that's pretty disturbing. But one of the statistics I want to talk to you about tonight is that 1 in 6 college women will be sexually assaulted before she graduates from college. And in that vein, tomorrow night we're at the Napa College in the Little Theater. We're going to be showing the movie The Hunting Ground. About 2 years ago, I think it was at the Sundance Film Festival, this movie appeared, and it really has gained large recognition. And the song, Until It Happens to You by Lady Gaga, was one of the best movies, one of the best songs from a movie in this year's Academy Awards. So I invite all of you to come. The movie's free. It starts at 7 o'clock tomorrow night. I encourage all of you, if you have children who will be going to school and college in the next couple of years, if you have friends who have children who will be going to college in the next couple of years, to see this movie. It is very provocative, very well done, and well worth seeing. And again, I thank you so much for the proclamation and your support. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here tonight. And if you could leave a brochure with our staff so we can make sure that we present that out in our lobby. Thank you very much. So now we do get to the public comment portion for tonight. Again, this is for items not on the agenda, so we'll still have a chance to talk about what many of you are here to talk about, I believe. But any item not on the agenda tonight, now would be the time to address the council. Yes. Welcome.
Good evening. I'm Zoe Harris. I'm here on behalf of my daughter. You know, we were here 2 weeks ago. I know everybody's busy, but she is starting a book club for teen book club. And please, anybody who's 12 and up, come for their first meeting on May 11 at the library, 4 to 5. So please support us because we have great library. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to come up and address the council on an item not on the agenda? Yes.
Good evening. I'm
Hello.
Megan Mason. I know you all are aware, obviously, of your recent award for the town being the 5th most beautiful town in the
Yeah, we heard something
country.
about that. Yes.
You didn't acknowledge that, huh? That's a great award, and I commend you all. Piggybacking on that, I'm here because I do have some questions and concerns, particularly about the new landscaping that's been going on throughout the town. And I don't know, maybe I missed some of the information, but I'm concerned with how, I guess it's the drought-tolerant plantings that have been put in, and just feel that they don't reflect how our beautiful town. And I'm particularly concerned about what's happening with the little area in the Heritage Court cul-de-sac and the Heather Court cul-de-sac where there has no new plantings at all. It's still the black bark. And I didn't know what's happening. I've heard rumors, and I really was bothered by the rumors, so I would like to know what's happening. I'm hoping it's not some more accessibility issues. So I'm just making a plea that I've been here for 29 years and love it, obviously, and I think, again, it's for the beauty and the small town ruralness of it. And I'm just requesting that we try and keep that feeling, that beauty, the landscaping, and not tear out all of our green lawns. It's a concern. So can you tell me what's happening with that?
We're not really allowed to dialogue about the items that you bring forward because they're not agendized, but clearly our town staff has heard your concerns, and I'm quite confident that either Joe Tagliabashi or a member of his staff will be happy to explain the specifics of your concern and also more generally what the whole philosophy is.
Mr. Mayor, if you will, I'll take a first of all, the council's had a very public process with identifying areas that were going to be restructured for compliance with drought tolerance, and this was one of them. We actually had barricades and signs, but more to the point, we have been working with a few neighbors. We also received a California Conservation Corps grant, and frankly, we're going to acknowledge that the current situation in Heritage, we're working with several neighbors to do something different. So we agree that there's a few things that could be done to improve that. So we'll include you if you make sure Joe has your contact. Okay. We will continue to stay in a drought-tolerant landscaping, but we are willing to work with some neighbors and improve the aesthetics on that and look at some different plant material that may be more fitting. Okay. The focus of the drought-tolerant program is to allow us to continue to focus on maintaining larger pockets of the grass and turf area in the balance of the parks. So we're aware, and we'll be working to look at some landscaping, and also aware that it is a big change. But we also know that in some cases people don't pay attention to the information-seeking opportunities we provide until it's there. So we're working with a few neighbors, and we'll include you further in that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to address the council? Seeing no one else come forward, we'll proceed with our agenda. And we do have one consent calendar item for consideration. Is there action to be had on that item?
I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
With your microphone on? Okay.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. We'll move right ahead to what I believe is the topic most of you are here to engage in, and that is our first presentation about, and this is informational. I'll make this as clear as I can. This is information seeking only. We are not taking any action on the issue of medical marijuana, whether it be delivery, cultivation, dispensaries, anything. We are here to listen and to learn, and we've invited some experts in various fields to come and make presentations so that we can hopefully all be more educated when we leave here tonight. We will be discussing a potential direction that we may give staff in terms of additional research, but there will not be any voting for any action one way or another tonight. So this is really meant to be an open dialogue with all of you and our experts and the council. Did I say that we're not taking any action tonight? I think so. Okay, with that, I believe, Steve, are you going to kick this off?
Thank you. As you've identified, the Town Council is currently engaged in a thoughtful and ongoing discussion related to the town's potential regulation of medical marijuana, especially as it relates to consideration of allowing those with a legitimate medical marijuana card as allowed under the Compassionate Care Act for medical marijuana use. As the mayor's alluded, the council has asked for additional information, especially as it relates to the topic of personal grow cultivation by those in possession of a card. We specifically requested representation from an industry representative, that is a medical marijuana industry representative, the Napa County Sheriff Department to talk about law enforcement perspective, and the Napa County Fire Department to talk about fire perspective. The focus of this conversation is related to the personal grow component, not the allowance of large whole-scale industrialization. It is focused to medical marijuana. The other thing we will stress is there is no ordinance, there is nothing for the council to act upon. This input is to help them further thoughtful discussion in which many people in the community have different and diverse opinions. So with that tonight...
And actually, Steve, if you're about to go into introductions, what I'd like to do just as a preview to that is we've invited some experts in their fields. Based on a conversation just prior to our meeting, I want to make clear also is that we're not asking for any specific advocacy on one side or another. We're talking about education, principally for the council, but also for all of you in the public and the staff. So while people may be representing law enforcement or the state legislature or an industry, we are really asking for fair and impartial information. So with that, I'll hand it back to Steve.
Thank you. Representing the medical marijuana industry will be Amy Jenkins. Representing the Napa County Sheriff Department is Sergeant Rick Greenberg. And representing the Napa County Fire Department, Battalion Chief Steve Hawks. We're appreciative of you all being here tonight and to share information, and we will start with Amy Jenkins.
Welcome, Amy. And if you could please just elaborate a little bit more on your credentials and
I'd be happy
why you
to.
know so much about this.
I would be more than happy to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. It's actually a pleasure to be here. It was a long time ago that I stood before you, actually as an advocate for local government when I was working for the League of California Cities. So I think to the mayor's point, I actually consider myself, while I do represent the medical cannabis industry, I actually better characterize or feel like it's more appropriate to say I'm a sensible regulation advocate. I've been working in public policy for 21 years, 8 years in local government, 2 years as a deputy CAO at a county. I saw the impacts of an unregulated environment as it relates to medical marijuana, and after serving 3 years as a chief of staff in the state Senate, where we wrote one of the first medical marijuana regulatory bills with the California police chiefs and the League of California Cities, I set out to try to better educate and professionalize the medical marijuana or medical cannabis industry, as it's now being called primarily in the state legislature. So again, I consider myself a regulation advocate. I can speak the industry. I can talk the industry talk, but I'm here, as the mayor indicated, to provide kind of an objective overview of existing policy, what has recently happened in the legislature, and can answer any questions you have on this matter, both from a local government perspective as well as from a marijuana or cannabis advocacy perspective. So for the benefit of the audience, I thought maybe just provide a little bit of a historical overview as to how we got here very, very briefly. So as most of you know, in 1996, the California voters did approve Prop 215, the California Compassionate Use Act. It was approved by California voters to exempt certain patients and their primary caregivers from criminal liability under state law for the possession and cultivation of cannabis. It was essentially enacted to, one, ensure that seriously ill Californians have the right to obtain and use cannabis for medical purposes where that medical use is deemed appropriate and has been recommended by a physician who has determined that the person's health would benefit from its use, and two, to ensure that patients and their primary caregivers who obtain and use cannabis for medical purposes are exempt from criminal prosecution or sanction. That was the very crux of 215. Understanding that there was a lot of complexity to this issue in 2003, there was a senator that approved or introduced SB 420, which established the Medical Marijuana Program Act, or MPP, and this required the California Department of Public Health to establish and maintain a program for a statewide identification card system to better help local law enforcement officers identify and verify that cardholders are able to cultivate, possess, and transport certain amounts without being subject to arrest. Now, I would note that this identification card program is active in every county in California, though it is a voluntary program for medical patients, though I would note that patients do also obtain a secondary card, usually from their physician who prescribes the card, but whether they participate in the statewide verification program is currently optional. But I want to make that clarification. There's been a number of other policies. The Attorney General put out some guidelines in 2008 to, again, try to prevent the illicit market, the perpetuation of an underground economy. A lot of cities took that guidance and established ordinances pursuant to the Attorney General's guidelines. But be that as it may, there's since the passage been a flood of cannabis collectives and cooperatives that have essentially created a patchwork of local regulations with no real statewide standards. So understanding this, and after numerous years and candidly a lack of political will in many instances, a coalition came together and in 2015, after nearly 20 years, passed the Medical Marijuana Regulation and Safety Act, which was signed by the governor in October of 2015. This represents the first comprehensive framework for the regulation and licensure of medical cannabis in the state's history. And what you're now seeing in the legislature, and I was almost late because I was testifying on some legislation on this matter, there's now 22 bills in the legislature that are either trying to kind of clean up this issue or address additional challenges associated with the implementation. We're dealing with a very, very large industry. The primary tenet of the MMRSA, it is now called, is a system of dual licensure whereby you need both a state and local license to ensure compliance. And that program will essentially take effect on January 1, 2019, roughly. The state licensure piece is supposed to come online in 2018, and they're offering a year grace period for providers that want to be part of the commercialized industry to get a local approval and a state approval. I know you're here to talk about more of the specifics to primary caregivers and patients, but just a couple quick points. So again, it's a dual licensure framework for commercial. It establishes caps on cultivation. It establishes 17 license categories. It limits vertical integration, which means that you can only apply for 2 kinds of licenses. It establishes minimum health and safety standards, which are, I think, very sorely missing right now. Testing lab requirements, security requirements. So it will be a very heavily regulated environment once it comes online officially, again, between the 2018 and 2019 timeframe. But what it also does is it clarifies some of the challenges and parameters associated with patients and primary caregivers. So I'll highlight those for you. It does provide exemptions for patients and primary caregivers from that licensing framework, which I discussed. More specifically, it says that no state license is required for patients who cultivate, possess, store, manufacture, or transport cannabis exclusively for his or her personal use and does not distribute to anyone else. It also provides that no state cultivation license is required for a cultivation area that is 100 square feet or less if it's, again, for personal use and not distributed to anyone else. And then when it applies to primary caregivers, it says that no state license is required for caregivers who cultivate, possess, store, manufacture, transport, donate, or provide for no more than 5 qualified patients and who do not receive payment except for actual costs to actually grow the medical cannabis. Now, for primary caregivers up to 5, it does provide a 500 square foot or less cultivation site, and again, it's limited to those five patients. So one thing for your benefit, though, that I think I need to stress is that while those are kind of the basic parameters highlighted in the MMRSA, the key thing for you to understand is that it also does not preempt policing power over patient and primary caregiver cultivation. This was actually a big debate that occurred at the tail end of last year. It resurrected itself a little bit earlier in this legislative cycle. And what it does is now says that local governments can still enforce for primary caregivers and patients zoning requirements, local ordinances. You can enforce local permit and licensing requirements, and you can exercise police authority under Section 7, Article 11 of the California Constitution, which essentially says you can establish additional standards and requirements and impose bans. So that's essentially where you are today. So where do we go from here? There, again, is a lot of debate among local communities just like yours about whether or not to explore a broader licensed medical framework under those 17 license categories, or whether cities want to limit, or towns want to limit it specifically to patients and primary caregivers. I will tell you that for, kind of the broader debates and a lot of the discussions I've attended, there has been a lot of support for the patient primary caregiver model and some limited exceptions under some of the license categories, though trends and attitudes are shifting. And we are seeing some efforts on the part of larger cities, San Jose, Sacramento, Oakland, where they're looking at a larger for-profit model in addition to, again, the personal grows. So it's really all over the map. The nice thing about the MMRSA is by design, it was intended to address and meet the needs of local communities. That was a huge aspect of the legislation, and I think was really the reason that we were able to carry it home and get it to the governor's desk. I will tell you one of the ordinances that is kind of emerging as one of the models as it relates to personal grows for both patients and primary caregivers is a City of Riverside ordinance, which I think surprised a lot of people. It was considered a more conservative community. They're actually looking at an 8-plant minimum and indoor only. But I think the key to emphasize is that there is a lot of options that you have at your disposal. Again, the state legislation was intended to provide that basic framework for you. But whatever the needs and desires are of your constituents, you have the authority to impose those additional regulations and or bans if that is appropriate to you. So it's something to emphasize. I do think it's important, though, because I get asked a lot about some of the trends and what's happening both in California and nationwide. I will tell you that 24 states, including and the District of Columbia, have now passed laws permitting some level of medical use and in some cases adult use. 4 states, in fact, now allow adult use, and we are contemplating something on the ballot. 11 states also, in addition to California, also have adult use on the 2016 ballot. And right now we're looking at about 48% of the U.S. population is now living in jurisdictions that either accept some form of medical use or adult use nationwide. That number is anticipated to grow to about 58% of the population after the November election in 2016. I say all of this because, again, I think it's a very, very difficult choice as cities and towns grapple with how they wish to regulate this for the benefit of their communities. But attitudes are changing, and if you are to look at any of the polls in the that are for the November ballot and some of the proposals we're contemplating, they're polling at about 55%. So I think we're going to see those trends continue. But again, I think the key for you to recognize is you do have a lot of options at your disposal to ensure that you're meeting the needs of your community. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I helped write the legislation. I just wanted to be brief. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And just so folks understand, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite the council to ask any questions of Ms. Jenkins while she's at the podium. Then we're going to hear from our other presenters. The council will ask questions if we have them. Then I'm going to invite questions and comments from the audience. So I'll now ask if there are any questions from council. Ms. Jenkins. Councilmember Durham.
So can you tell me this that was passed in October of 2015, is this in anticipation of November 2016?
Some would argue yes, and I can't speak for the governor, but I can tell you that one of the arguments that industry presented to the administration and the legislature was the fact that we needed to establish some sort of a foundation. If the polling data is correct, this is the largest industry in California. It's estimated to be a $2.9 billion industry in California alone. Passing an adult use framework in the absence of some sort of, regulatory framework in advance of that, we thought was unwise, and we felt that California would be ill prepared again to address some of the challenges associated with a broader legalization effort. So that was certainly our argument and intent. And I believe, I don't want to speak for the league, but I believe that was one of their message points as well.
So is this modeled after anything going on in Colorado or Washington?
They did try to incorporate some best practices and lessons learned from Colorado and Washington. One of the areas that was of particular concern when the Colorado model passed was the lack of regulatory oversight over manufacturing. A lot of people have read and seen some of the challenges associated with regulating edibles and some of these broader universe of products. That was something that Colorado was relatively silent on. And then you've also seen some changes that we've kind of looked at relative to their taxation framework. So they have a 15% excise tax threshold in addition to local taxing authority. They have subsequently dropped that down because they felt the taxes were too high. So we're trying to take a lot of those best practices. We're also looking at DUI marijuana impairment, which is a really big deal, and we're working on the science now. That was something we looked at very, very closely. And then the whole vertical integration issue, which I very briefly touched on, but that's the whole notion of you grow, you transport, you manufacture, you dispense, and you're all one entity. What the Colorado legislature decided to do was break that up. They have subsequently gone back to an optional vertical integration model. So we looked at all of those. There's some ongoing modifications to the current legislation. I suspect you'll see more changes in California, but we looked very closely. And Washington, too.
Okay. And then, so just so I understand correctly, this is, everything we're just talking about now is medical.
Correct.
If indeed the initiative passes in November 2016, that will be a whole nother level, correct?
It will be a whole other level. I would note that what happened, it was interesting, when the medical framework passed, a lot of the legalization advocates did not intend for it to pass. So they had a very, very different model that was not as tightly regulated and did not honor the local control framework. And what happened was, once the legislation was signed, they went back to the drawing board, made some very significant modifications. Now, to that point, though, I will say that there are some distinctions. Under the legalization framework, actual patients and caregivers would be allowed to grow, even in areas that are banned, under an adult use framework, under the initiative that I believe will qualify. It's called the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. However, local governments would still be able to maintain some local parameters. So you could impose some restrictions, but you would not be able to actually address people's ability to grow in their homes. So that's one major distinction to keep in mind.
So if I hear you correctly then on the statement that you just made, if there are certain things we could do now which ultimately could be overturned, which would then need, if the initiative passes in November 16, that we would then need to revisit it after November 2016.
That is in fact possible. Yes, that is in fact possible.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Dornbecker?
Hi, Amy.
Hi.
I was wondering about the Riverside ordinance model.
Mm-hmm.
And we have had some conversations with about the legitimate medical marijuana needs of seniors or people with fixed income being able to grow in their homes. I'd like to ask you more about, do you know why the Riverside model says indoor growth only?
I don't want to speak specifically, but I can give you kind of a general assessment. There's a lot of concerns that have been raised particularly in urban communities relative to odor. The plant can be very strong in terms of its smell. So I think there were some concerns about odor issues. Those have been raised in a number of communities. I would not want to opine too specifically on the council deliberations, but it tends to be the primary argument. The other issue oftentimes is proximity to schools. and other public places. Oftentimes, if you mandate indoor grow, then you don't have to deal with seeing a plant, having it be exposed in some way. Obviously, you could ultimately try to control that through the establishment of a local ordinance, but I think that factors into some of those decisions as well.
And then the other issue about growing indoors is that the plants need a lot of light, I understand. So I've read about fires that are caused by the electrical. So did someone determine that 8 plants was, small enough number that it wouldn't, they did?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. And I certainly have read some of the stories about fires in homes. A lot of those safety hazards are associated with the illegal manufacture of cannabis, and not actually the growing of cannabis indoors. Something that I think your law enforcement presenters will be able to explain further is there's something called a butane hash process where they extract the oils. That's not the only way it's done, but you will oftentimes see or hear about explosions and fires usually resulting from that process and not actually growing of the plant.
Oh. And then, are there any studies that talk about if we had discussed limiting the number of plants that medical marijuana with, all of the proper, the recommendation from the doctor, and if they registered with the state, but we talked about either limiting it to 3 or 6. Are there any studies that talk about the smell of fewer plants versus more plants or anything?
I'm sure there are. I haven't seen one, but I certainly think it's a good question. I'm happy to look into it and follow up with you.
Well, if you would, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And actually, I was going to ask about I wasn't aware that there was an adult initiative that was qualifying for 2016.
Well, it hasn't qualified yet. It is in the signature gathering phase. I don't know where they are in terms of process. I know that several weeks ago they had surpassed the 25% threshold on the number of signatures required. So it is not qualified for the November ballot. And I want to make very clear to that question in case I didn't communicate that accurately. So you would still be under the Adult Use of Marijuana Act able to regulate, but you couldn't ban. So some of the concerns you've raised about indoor-outdoor smell, all of that could still be, contemplated as part of whatever sort of policy or ordinance you're considering.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Mueller, questions? So a couple questions I have for you. One, other jurisdictions, is there any form of local permitting or registration for anyone that is pre-qualified through medical recommendation to grow? And would that be something appropriate for us to consider?
I know that, it's interesting for commercial operations. There's a fairly public registry. I'm thinking about the legislation. I don't think there would be anything that would preclude you from doing that. No.
Okay, I'm just wondering about, and maybe this is something more for our law enforcement.
I'm going to write that down, right.
Representative, because there could be some privacy issues.
Privacy issues, correct. And that's why I'm kind of having a red flag in my head. I just want to make sure I'm not misstating that. But It would seem that under the policing powers, there would be some opportunity for a registry, provided that you were protecting the patient, confidentiality. But for purposes of public safety and regulation, I would think that would be permissible. But I will double check on that.
Thank you. And a follow up also to proximity to schools and children, and certainly that's one of the concerns that's already been addressed by our local residents and by us. Is there language that is considered standard about distance from schools or anything else in terms of impacts to residents?
It's interesting. That's changing, and there's a lot of discussion about that in the legislature right now. It's, I believe, a 600-foot buffer between schools and daycare centers, but But what the legislation stipulates is that that's the general framework, but there would be nothing that would preclude you from, making that providing a smaller buffer. So you could shrink that. You could even expand that. It's interesting how it's written, but it's just considered almost a general guideline right now in the legislation.
Okay, and the last question I have for you right now is how all this relates to federal law. And as far as as far as I understand, it's still illegal at the federal level.
It is.
But the state of California, under Governor Brown, has decided to not recognize that. And so how does all of this play into that relationship?
There is some level of uncertainty always, until, just for the benefit of the public, cannabis or marijuana is still considered a Schedule I hallucinogenic drug. So it's illegal under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. There is some guidance. There was something called the Cole Memo that was put out by the U.S. Department of Justice, essentially saying, and this is certainly under the Obama administration, so anything can change, but under the Cole Memo, it essentially stipulated that if states that develop a robust regulatory framework for the licensure and regulation of marijuana, the Department of Justice would not go in and enforce. So there were, I believe, 8 different parameters outlined in the Cole Memo, and the legislation sought to capture those parameters. So I think, again, not wanting to speak for the administration, but for the drafters, I think they felt like they achieved that objective. So for the time being, the expectation is we will not see any sort of federal prosecution or raids subsequent to the passage of the legislation.
So just one last general question.
Sure.
Your opinion is any legislation likely to be coming out will not speak to outright banning. It's all going to be related to how to control and regulate.
Correct.
Because you think that the philosophy of the legislature is going to be banning is no longer going to be appropriate. Is that kind of an overgeneralization?
I think that's respectfully, I think that might be an overgeneralization. I think preserving a local government's right to ban was very, very important to this legislature. However, the voters will ultimately decide what happens in November. Now, I would note that as it relates to commercial for-profit enterprises, locals would still be allowed to ban those operations in their communities, the only distinction really being the personal grows. But the legislature, in large part, would like to, has encouraged local control, and I think the legislation really speaks to that. I don't foresee any changes in that model in the near future.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Durham.
Follow-up question.
Sure.
Can you tell me how many plants you can grow in 100 square feet or less? With knowing that you're not, given your experience over mine.
Right. I don't know if I'm capable. It's interesting because part of the challenge is I've done a lot of tours. And I think it oftentimes depends on the quality of the grow, whether it's indoor, outdoor. I've seen plants as high as 10 feet in an outdoor grow site. So I think that would narrow your one's ability to grow any number of plants. The actual 100 square foot and 500 square foot, I think, speaks specifically to canopy, but I don't have a good number for you.
And then, in your professional opinion,
Sure.
How much does one plant produce?
It depends. I've heard anywhere from 2 to 4 pounds per plant in total.
How much is in one joint?
I don't know.
An ounce?
No. An ounce. I think an ounce of actual dried flour is. Well, let's see. It's usually about a half of a gallon bag.
Okay.
Ziploc bag.
Very good. Thank you very much. I
Sure.
appreciate it.
No problem.
So don't go too far in case
no
any
problem.
members of our audience have questions for you also.
No
after
problem. And
all
I'll
the
try
presenters.
to get some answers for you while I'm sitting down.
Thank you
All right,
very much.
thanks.
So, Steve, did you want to introduce our next presenter?
Yes. Next up is Sergeant Rick Greenberg with the Napa County Sheriff Department.
Welcome.
Good evening. And thanks for having me. Again, my name is Rick Greenberg. I've been with the Sheriff's Department for about 15 years now. I've actually been assigned to the narcotics unit as a detective for about 6 years, and then recently in the last 2 years I've been a supervisor of our narcotics unit. So almost half my career I've been in narcotics. I don't know if council was able to read the memo I had produced to Sergeant Crawford. I can touch on that. Not sure what exactly you wanted me to cover from law enforcement perspective.
I think if you could, because the audience wouldn't necessarily have been privy to seeing some of that information, if you can give some very basics on, or even more elaborate information on any concerns or any evolution of thinking that has happened from a law enforcement perspective as it relates to, is it safe, is it not safe to allow registered medical marijuana users to grow, the differences between indoor and outdoor growth, if there are crime implications to that, safety of neighborhoods, kind of generally speaking. It sounds like you've
Sure.
kind of seen and heard it all out there.
And then, over the last 15 years in my career, it's obviously evolved tremendously and changed, and like Amy was saying, it's changed, yearly. Right now, I'll touch on indoor cultivation first. Indoor cultivation, I can answer your question you had. Actually, in 100 square feet, you'd need about probably 3 lights to grow 6 to 8 plants. And it depends on how tall they are, how much space they're going to take up. Usually indoor plants, obviously they start out as clones. They're only, maybe 12 to 14 inches tall. And then, as they get mature, they get much taller. And, in a residential home, I'd say probably 4 feet is about what they'd get to. Obviously, depending on the height of the ceiling. If the larger commercial grows, they're, have 20-foot ceilings, and they could get taller, but not generally. As far as indoor cultivation, some of the, hazards, we do see some not so professional electrical work sometimes, and obviously the electricity is sometimes actually stolen from PG&E. They'll tap into the meters, and that's not on every case. We do get a couple of those a year. And as far as the power goes, obviously, they're not up to the code, building code, and all that stuff. So there is the potential hazard of that. And as far as the water goes, most indoor grows are hydroponic, which mean they have they're usually raised trays up off the floor. We've had those spilled and gone out the front door, into the street, that type of thing, into the gutter, and there is, fertilizers and that type of stuff. There is a potential risk of, if someone that has an indoor grow going, another person might go in and try to do like a home invasion robbery type thing. But if they're legitimately growing medical marijuana for medical use and they only have 6 to 8 plants, we're not going to see that. And the smell indoors, they use a lot of filters and stuff like that. A lot of times they'll filter it through the chimney or through air conditioning. We don't generally get a lot of complaints from indoor grow smell. Most of the complaints are from the outdoor grow smell. As far as law enforcement, right now, as far as compliance checks, we have to base our search off either consent, where the homeowner says, yes, you can come in and make sure that I'm in compliance, or probable cause for a search warrant, where we actually have to have a judge say, okay, law enforcement can go in and check this grow and make sure they're in compliance. So an option for council would be possibly, with code enforcement, is that we could tag along with them to make sure that they're in compliance. But I don't know if, where that would go. Most generally, folks are pretty cooperative with us when we go to do our compliance checks, and oftentimes we ask for consent, and then consent is granted because they're in compliance. And I'll touch on the outdoor grows. The outdoor grows, like Amy said, they can get 10, 12 feet tall. They get quite large. People often call them Christmas trees sometimes because they can get bushy, they can get tall, or both. And that smell, we get every summer. We get numerous complaints. Actually, tomorrow is usually the quote unquote start date. It's 4/20, so that's when the plants usually go in the ground. Same as your vegetable garden you would have at your house. And then the harvest date for outdoor it just all depends on the plant, and like I always say, it depends on how good of a green thumb that person has. But generally, July to September is the harvest on outdoor cultivation. Indoor cultivation, it varies. They have different cycles. Some folks have plants going all year round, so they have a crop all year round. And then the outdoor, we get a lot of problems. The only problems we run into a lot of the times is the theft. The plants get tall, they get heavy, they hang over the fence. People come by with, some lopping shears and help themselves type thing, and there can be arguments and that type of stuff. And another concern we have is with kids. Kids like to spread rumors and, the neighbor down the street's growing weed, we'll go, help ourselves, that type of thing. Other than that, inside, the only things I can think of that you guys might want to consider is the mold issue, proper ventilation. I've seen a few homes where the moisture sucked into the grout, and there was a huge mold issue with the tile and the grout. Anything porous will collect the mold. And that's about it.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the council? Councilmember Dornbecker, do you have any right now?
Not right now. I'm absorbing the info.
Councilmember Mueller?
I don't really know if you're the right person to ask this question to, but one thing I've been struggling with are rental properties. So if somebody is a renter, do they need permission from their landlord, or do you have any information about how that works, or if it doesn't work?
We run into that quite often, very often.
Okay.
Typically, I think that would be more of a landlord-tenant issue. As far as legally, I don't believe law enforcement would get involved in anything like that. It would be more of a civil issue between both parties. It would be the same, for instance, if you rented a home to somebody and they had pets and you weren't allowing pets, and the pets ruined the carpet or the floor coverings. I would think it would be more on the, as far as law enforcement, there's not much we would really be able to do, unless the grow was illegal. So I think that would be something that the landlords would have to put in their rental agreements.
Okay, thanks.
So again, sometimes we're not going to be sure who is the best person
Sure.
To answer this. So if it's not you and it's one of our other presenters, some of the public dialogue we've already heard, testimony has to do with the ability to grow in order to be able to afford one's personal use. And it gets a little bit to your answer to Councilmember Durham's question about what does 100 square feet really mean, and how many, what does 6 or 8 plants mean? In your professional opinion, on average, what would you say would be the number of plants, or roughly a cost to an individual who is, who has a medical recommendation card and is abiding by all the intents of the regulations? What is something that would be considered reasonable? And I know that every case is going to be different. Somebody may need, find the need to use that on a daily basis. Some may do it less frequently. But is there any advice you can give from your professional perspective?
Well, as far as the yield per plant, indoor varies from outdoor. Indoor, you're not going to get as much yield as outdoor. And an outdoor plant, I've seen plants get 1, 2, 3 pounds of actual bud from an outdoor plant. Indoor plants are much smaller, and they come from clones. They're not going to be produce as much actual product that they smoke. An indoor plant, on average, 3 to 4 ounces per plant is what we generally see on an indoor cultivation.
Okay. And Can you speak at all toward non-smoking? So mostly we've been talking about edibles. We hear about that. That's one of the biggest concerns about children getting exposed to it. Is there any advice or experience you can share about the impacts of edibles? I know principally what we're talking about right now is growing, potentially growing at home, but is anything else you can provide?
We don't.
Or there's no answer yet.
Yeah, we don't really see too many edibles. The one thing I can touch on is the butane honey oil that you guys had heard about. That, no matter what happens with the decisions in November, that crime is basically honey oil is when you take marijuana and you put it in, generally speaking, you put it in like a PVC pipe tube and you run butane through it. That's the most common way. And then out the other end, it extracts all the THC, and the THC is actually what creates the high from the marijuana. That is a felony currently. It's basically the same charge as a meth lab because you're chemically altering a controlled substance, and federally marijuana is still a controlled substance. So that has potential to, we've had, I think, 3 house fires in Napa County that I'm aware of, that I know at least I've responded to and assisted with. And those were all directly from the butane honey oil. And once you possess a medical recommendation, that doesn't allow you to produce butane honey oil. So criminally, you still get charged.
How regularly is a medical recommendation reviewed or reviewed for appropriate behavior? Do you know that?
It's annually. And as far as the state actual card, I very rarely see those nowadays. So I don't know what is going to happen later down the road. But we very rarely see them. Most of the time, we just are provided with the actual doctor's recommendation.
Okay. Seeing no other questions from council, thank you very much for your presentation. We'll go on to our battalion chief, Steve.
And with that, Battalion Chief Steve Hawks, Napa County Fire Department.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Dunbar and council members. Steve Hawks with the Napa County Fire Department. I have 23 years in CAL FIRE. Last 20 have been here in Napa County. Last 3 as the battalion chief for the Untitled Battalion here in town. I'd like to touch on some points that Sergeant Greenberg talked about as well. First of all, the electrical draw on a residential structure. Electrical system is designed per code to a certain level, which I just learned tonight by listening to Sergeant Greenberg, is that it takes about 2 to 3 plants. You need 1 grow lamp to help with the lighting of the plant to help it grow. And that's about 1,000 watts per light, which can add a draw on the electrical system of a residence. And if the residence wasn't designed to carry that load, then that could be a potential ignition source for a fire. If the residence is going to be upgraded to accommodate that extra load, then ideally it would be to the electrical code and to standard, and so it's safe to add that extra load onto it. And as Sergeant Greenberg alluded to, is that sometimes it's not always done to that standard, or it's taken from a neighbor's house or from PG&E illegally. So there's a potential issue with that. Permanent wiring. Sometimes electrical drop cords could be used in place of or in lieu of permanent wiring. And by fire code, that's not supposed to be longer than 30 days. So, they'd want to do the upgrades to their electrical system per electrical code and building code. So, drawing a blank here, I had one more point I was going to make. Sergeant Greenberg also mentioned that, Fertilizers are frequently used to help with the growth of the plants, and our firefighters are frequently inside residences for medical aids or other type calls. And when we go to a residence, we want to put our personnel from a fire department perspective in a safe environment while they're able to do and perform their job. So that's a potential risk to the health of the firefighters that should be considered as well. All in all, I don't know that it's a significant, issue with the fire department, but it's something that could lead to increased fire starts, mainly due to the electrical system. Oh, the last point that I forgot was the grow lamps. They take 1,000 watts to, they produce 1,000 watts of energy, and if it touches a flammable source, that could be a potential ignition source for a fire. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Dornbecker.
Yes, I was wondering, in the years that you've been in Napa County, how many house fires have been caused by indoor grows?
None that I've been to that I'm aware of. I think we're pretty fortunate here in Napa County. It's unlike other areas of the state where it is a significant issue. Back in October, I spent some time at the UC Davis Burn Center when we had some firefighters that were burned, and they had 12 beds in the burn center and 25 burn patients. And of those burn patients, half of them were related to honey oil labs and illegal grow sites. So yeah, that is a definite issue, but I haven't seen it as much here in Napa County as in other locations.
Oh, thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Mueller?
This, you might not have the answer to this, but we've heard that outdoors it grows very tall and there's a lot of smell. Indoors it probably doesn't grow quite as tall, but I would assume the smell was probably proportional. Do you know anything about ventilation systems and what's required? Like if you walk into a place that is allowing growing indoors, can you smell it? And my real question by asking this is, if someone lives in an apartment complex and somebody's growing it in one apartment, can the smell travel? Do you have any information?
I don't have
that?
any information on that. Maybe.
Well, we need to have you come up to the microphone if you're going to respond. So.
Okay.
Okay. There may be other questions for you to come up.
I don't have any information on that.
Okay.
Was that the end of the question you had? Mm-hmm. Okay. The one question I had is about, you're talking about this honey oil extraction, and the combustibility is the question I have for you. Are you aware of an elevated level of combustibility of plants more than a typical house plant, where any other, I mean, if somebody has candles near a medical or a marijuana plant versus another plant, is there a higher danger of?
Not with the plants themselves. In the honey oil process, it's the butane that's highly flammable, is what can catch fire and cause an explosion and cause the burns.
So there wouldn't be an elevated risk factor to the plants themselves being grown
Not the plants
indoors?
themselves, that's correct.
Or outdoors. Okay. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your presentation also. And
Thank you.
I know you can't go very far because we have you later on the agenda. So, I'll ask the council, any questions come to mind before I invite members of the public to share their thoughts or ask questions?
Our
Sergeant
police
Greenberg?
yeah, can he
Yep.
talk about ventilation?
Okay, yeah, let's just wrap that up real quick. Ventilation, especially in multi-family dwellings, was the question, I believe.
Right.
Generally, it's, like I previously stated, it's ventilated. It can be ventilated in several ways. In the apartment buildings, I didn't touch on that, and that was a good question you had. It is common for neighbors to complain of smell from indoor grows in apartments. It's such a small setting, numerous families living together, especially when a lot of times the complaints we get are when the door is open. If a door is open and closed, the smell will come out, even if it's ventilated. But generally speaking, we don't receive numerous complaints. We do receive a few. But it's just how it's ventilated. there's no regulation on, okay, you're not ventilating the marijuana grow properly, but they're still growing it for medical use. So
it's just an area where the ventilation adequacy hasn't, unlike the electricity, really hasn't been determined, right? Or is it not a problem, or?
As far as electricity goes, criminally, I'm coming from a law enforcement standpoint, there's no criminal charges in not ventilating your grow properly.
Okay.
Electrical-wise, if you're stealing power from PG&E, bypassing the meter, obviously there is criminal charges.
Okay.
I think some of the questions that you're addressing are issues that we would have to consider at our level about conditions of use, basically. If we were to allow indoor growth, hypothetically, we may require this type of ventilation system, this type of electrical. Would that be a fair description, Town Attorney?
Yes, so many of these concerns could be addressed the same way you address these concerns with respect to many other land use issues. So you'd make them requirements in an ordinance, and they'd be enforced just as other code enforcement efforts are taken.
And if we found a violation, there would be some level of structure of fines potentially, or even prohibition of the use altogether of repeated violations.
The town can create both administrative and criminal penalties for violations of any portion of its code.
All right. Thank you, Sergeant. Since we have a large group of folks tonight, I'm going to allow 3 minutes for each person to comment. If we get through everyone that wants to speak, we can consider revisiting and allowing folks to repeat, but I would like to have everybody respect everybody else's time tonight. We are interested. I do see the first hand up, but please be respectful of the time limit, and we'll, like I said, try to allow everyone to speak as much as they would like. But I have a question. I'd just like to ask Amy something. Who should be at the microphone? You should be at the microphone so that we can hear your question on record, and I'll ask any of our presenters to please write down the questions and be prepared to answer, but we're going to have the whole room ask their questions, make their comments, and then we'll go back for answers and further discussion from our presenters.
Thank you. Steve Mercer. On a personal level.
Yeah, I'm saying
personal level.
You actually do need to address us, but she can hear you.
I got you. I'm concerned about the cost of growing indoors and outdoors, the codes that are required to be fulfilled. It becomes extremely expensive, and I just wanted to ask Amy if she had any idea what those costs might be.
Okay, thank you. Who would like to come up next? Carol, actually, I think I see Ms. Fink on her way up. You always sit in the back, but that's okay.
Usually at home.
Welcome. Wait, did the Giants, are they not playing tonight?
They're playing.
Oh, then I know you'll be brief.
Elections in New York, of course, are coming in too, so there's a lot going on tonight.
If you could just bring that microphone down a little bit lower, please. Thank you.
Mayor and Council, Carol Fink. It was important enough to me to come today. As a critical care nurse for 51 years, I'm really excited that there's going to be some thought about DUI issues with marijuana. I think that really DUI impairment is going to be a really important issue, but it has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. As a psych nurse, I love the process that you're doing now because you're very carefully learning. We all need to learn, and before decisions are made, really gathering from experts and carefully going through the process. I think it's a wonderful process. I've learned a lot from when people first approached you and the topic first came up. I've done a lot of reading and I'm learning a whole lot. In fact, in renewing my license this year, for the first time, there's a 15-hour part on medical marijuana. So we professionals we're a little behind the fact, but getting on top of it. What I am concerned about is in towns like San Mateo, even in Colorado, outdoor grows seem to have to happen with 4 walls, a roof, and locks. That there's really concern about children, about thievery, about smell, and that hasn't been talked about yet. I'm just caution us all to carefully draft whatever recommendations get drafted, because we would be as I understand it, we would be the first in the valley. I understand that St. Helena, Calistoga, American Canyon, and I believe Napa do not allow growing at this point, any cultivation at this point. So whatever we do, we would be leading the way. And I was, as I say, reading that in Colorado, even after all this time, they're still demanding an enclosed space with proper locks, according to what their sheriff's recommendations are. So thank you for the process, for involving us, and it would be wonderful, I think, to involve more of the community at some point, because I have great respect for the patients, the families who have come and talked to you before about wanting to save money. It's a great question. What's really the difference? Friends who use in San Francisco use about $30 a month for 1 ounce for fibromyalgia treatment. And they would be buying their plants from the dispensary with their cards. So really, how much of a savings actually would there be? I know what I thought. Napa seems to have a spot ready to put in a dispensary on Imola in the new shopping center. And I've been reading that around the corner from Goodwill, where there's a health food store, that spot is being looked at by Napa to put in a dispensary, which would be closer, would save on gas between Vallejo, although today it looks like that Vallejo clinic is in some trouble, but in Santa Rosa as well. But it would be closer to be able to purchase in Napa. I hope they do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Mr. Stewart, I know you're anxious to get up there, so come on up. If you could just tilt that microphone back up a little bit, please. Thank you.
My name's Robert Stewart, and I wanted to clear something up, and I hope Amy will agree, that the difference between sativa and indica plants. Sativa plants is a strain that's more for the creative part of your brain, and it's a taller plant. It grows tall. The indica plant is the plant that we use to, like myself, I'm 100% PTSD, Vietnam, it calms me down, it helps me sleep, it's used for back pain. And the indica plant, my indica plants have never grown more than 5 feet tall. So I'm going to, yeah, okay. And I agree with Officer Greenberg about the honey extraction. That can be a dangerous process. In fact, the indoor growth, I hate to say this, but it can be dangerous. Outdoor growth is a lot safer. And as far as fertilizing goes, organic, natural fertilizer is the way to go. And if you grow indica plants, and 2 to 4 pounds a plant, I've never been that fortunate. I've never even gotten a pound off of one of my plants, so I must be doing something wrong. But yeah, the indica plants, they only grow 4 or 5 foot tall. Sativa plants are the ones that grow tall, and I think those are the ones that I think more of the criminal element are into, that will come by and chop them or steal them because they can see them. But the indica plant, they're just little plants like this. In fact, you can cultivate your plants to grow along like maybe a foot high and grow this way. They don't have to grow straight up. So I want to thank everybody for having this meeting tonight. It's been very informative, and so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Okay, who's next? Welcome back.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, and I'm Zoe DeGala-Harris again, and I want to say thank you for your information. But I live in Yountville for 19 years with my husband and 2 daughters, who's 14 years old and 17 years old, who were born here and went to our little community school, Yountville Elementary School. I'm not opposed to medical marijuana. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. For a person who really needs it for medical reason, but I am opposed to growing it outside where young people are exposed to it every day. This is a small town, a family-oriented community. Once the door opens for a minor acceptance of what some people consider vice, we'll all know that will be just the beginning. I don't want our sweet, lovely town, already known as the top 5 most beautiful town in America, so great, congratulations to us, to also be known of one of the top pot growing community is too. I am originally from Michigan, well, first Philippines, then Michigan, where in Michigan it's already legal to grow marijuana plants. I have already learned from people who live there that it never stopped at 12 plants, and more often than not escalate into a marijuana farms. As far as enforcement goes, to properly enforce this potential law would cost the town money, new position, and invasion of our currently quiet private lives. Incidentally, the jury is still out as the marijuana drought tolerance. During a time of water concern in Yountville, I believe allowing growth is not in the town's best water conservation interest. I am not qualified to address the effects of smoking or a secondhand smoke from marijuana, but common sense and some research shown marijuana smoke is damaging to our health, just as smoke from fires is, and cigarette smoke is. And there is no way to prevent or contain smoke from entering, spreading into our neighbor's property. I fail to comprehend how this states, which for all intents and purpose banned cigarette smoking, yet it is considering allowing marijuana smoking. I remember, I think 3 years ago, I stand here too about people smoking close to Yountville Elementary School, and we banned that. But anyway, but I say thank you for your consideration on behalf of my family, especially my 2 teenage girls. I urge you to drop this issue now and defer to the voters of the state, which will decide the issue in November. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else? Yes, please. You were the first one in the room. I figured you might
Well,
want to speak.
you know, I've never been to a town hall meeting before. I'm from Kentucky, and the county I grew up in, I never attended one of the town hall meetings, or the city that I grew up in. But I am from Kentucky.
If you could just introduce yourself for our record.
Sorry, my name's Larry Enzer. My wife and I moved here about 2 years ago. We bought a house here in Yountville. And I do want to say one thing before I comment on the marijuana issue. I would like to compliment the town hall on the people that are working here and the consideration and how nice they've been on the questions we've had. So anyway, to get on to it, I was a deputy sheriff in Oldham County, Kentucky for about 25 years. And I saw the effects of marijuana. I know there's people that it's going to help, but I know the effects of it and what can happen to a community. What worries me is the people that may be growing it legal. There's going to be some problems with enforcing that. The kids are going to find out where, it's not only kids that are involved in it. I've seen it too long. But it's not only the kids, but it's other adults that want it. And I am very concerned. I love this town. It is fabulous. My wife and I have a place we're selling right now in Palm Springs to move here full time because we love it. But I don't want to be walking down the street and worry about smelling some marijuana coming around the corner. It's just, the first time I went to, when I was in college, after I graduated, I went back for a homecoming party. That was in the 60s. That tells you how old I am. And a fraternity brother invited me to his house for a party. And I walked in, and I I had never smelled marijuana. I said, what do you got in here? Marijuana? He said, yeah. And I said, I see, I'm out of here. I don't need it. I don't want it. I don't want to be around it. And I don't want our kids and our community to be around it, especially if it's outside. If they can do it in their house and not affect anybody else, more power to them. But I don't want to have to worry about walking around smelling it, just like you can't smell cigarette smoke. That's banned. So my opinion is, I was around it too long as a deputy sheriff in Kentucky. I don't want to be around it here. I don't like it. I don't like the smell from it, and I don't like the effects, and I don't like what it can do to the community. And I would think for law enforcement, it's going to cost a lot of money to add people on to go around and inspect to make sure that everybody is meeting and applying, by the law. They're obeying the law. I think it's going to cost you a lot of money to do that, and adding additional officers, and I don't think it's going to be cheap. That's my opinion. Thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Who else would like to speak tonight? Really? Okay.
Hi, Dave Borbis over on Vista Drive. We've heard a lot of good things. I want to focus my time with you in a couple of areas. First, I'm sympathetic to the people that need medical marijuana. 30 years ago, I gave some marijuana to my father at his request when he was sick. And I've been a registered nurse and worked in hospitals for many years, so I have been around sick people, both chronic and acutely ill. I'm sympathetic to that. What my concern is my experience in living in San Francisco and dealing with people who are growing it in their backyard, the smell that occurs, the additional traffic in the city. People sometimes cruise the neighborhoods looking for ways that they can take advantage of the situation. And what I'm concerned about here is that this will breed additional crime in our neighborhoods because people are looking through the small town of Yountville. It's a very small community, and they can cruise the streets pretty easily and try to go into people's backyards. And it disturbs privacy, and it may create other types of criminal activity along the way. So I think approaching this, you need to balance the needs of the individuals, but recognize that by doing that, you can create a larger public safety issue for the community at large. And so people who are not needing medical marijuana could still be impacted by these kinds of decisions. It doesn't necessarily prevent people from going to medical marijuana dispensaries and obtaining it in a controlled fashion, but allowing people to grow marijuana, particularly outdoors, I think creates a lot of different challenges for the community in terms of enforcement and safety. And I think that this should be kept in mind when these discussions and deliberations take place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's make sure that everyone has a chance at least to speak first, and then I'll invite you to come back. Would anyone else like to come up? Okay, Sergeant.
Just a couple of things, really actually more one thing, but I guess for the record, I'm John Crawford. I'm the sergeant from the Sheriff's Department in charge of the Downville station. As far as my expertise with marijuana growing, I've been in law enforcement nearly 22 years. A good part of my career was spent as an investigator in the Criminal Investigations Bureau. I was a detective for 5.5 years and was a supervisor for about 2.5. My expertise is more really along the lines of violent crime. So I have investigated cases of, or supervised cases of investigations into homicides, robberies, that sort of thing that do involve marijuana. However, they generally involve the larger clandestine, either outdoor grows or larger indoor grows. But in my career, I have also been around several instances of indoor grows, large and small. And my point for all this is getting back to Council Member Muller's question as far as ventilation and the issues that we could see very easily here in Yountville with the higher density type housing is that, so I've seen case files of very large grows where people filled entire houses and had hidden doors and very sophisticated operations, and nobody smelled a thing. And the reason was because they invest a lot of money because they're making a lot of money, and they're able to do that. I've also seen cases where less sophisticated grows with much less marijuana, or I've personally smelled it outside the residence. So I think to get to the question you really had as far as how is this going to affect quality of life for people living in tighter quarters, the answer really goes back to how much money is the person willing to spend that's growing their marijuana. So it sort of addresses both the electrical issue that Chief Hawks spoke to, it addresses the odor issue that other people have been concerned about, and the reality is you can absolutely, in my opinion, have an indoor grow where nobody's going to smell anything, because I've seen it, been around it, but it's very sophisticated, and people have to spend money to make that happen. So the question again comes back to, if you're living in tight quarters, how much money do you want to spend to be able to save money by growing your marijuana? So the proponents here have said, and I believe it's true, that they would like to be able to grow it in order to save themselves money. If they're living in an apartment complex where quarters are tight and the odor can be smelled every time the door is opened, or if it's being allowed to grow outside on a balcony or whatever, I think common sense would dictate they're probably not going to want to spend a significant amount of money to mitigate the issues that it's going to cause if their whole point is to save money in the first place. The sophisticated things that we've seen, or that I've seen in my career, again, the most sophisticated ones are the ones where they're making the most amount of money, where you've got an entire house, 3,000 square feet, 4,000 square feet, whatever, completely dedicated to growing marijuana, and you've got secret passageways, and it's like stuff you see in movies where the bookcase is open and you can walk into a room that you can't even see. So these things do exist. Obviously, I don't think that's really what we're talking about here, but again, just to get back to the question of how much ventilation do you need, it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You need so much that you don't smell it, and that's kind of what it boils down to. And how far is that person willing to go to be a good neighbor, to spend the money that they need to spend to make it palatable for everybody. So that's all I had.
Thank you for sharing your perspective also. Is there any other first-time speaker or question asker? Seeing none, Mr. Stewart, would you like to come back up?
I respect their opinion, the guy from Kentucky and the lady from Michigan, but it sounds to me like they're coming from a place of fear and ignorance when it comes to pot growth. When you're growing 4 or 5 plants, maybe 4 foot tall, it doesn't put out an offensive odor. It just doesn't. And so I hope you don't base your opinions on people coming up here coming from a place of fear and ignorance.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yes. And we won't turn this into...
I'm not going to turn it into a shouting match, but it's not ignorance. I served on a sheriff's department for 25 years. He can't tell me I'm ignorant and I don't know what I'm talking about.
Fair enough. Mr. Stewart? Mr. Stewart? Thank you. Any other folks like to comment tonight? Seeing no one else, I'll invite the council to have some dialogue if you would like to do that. I would like to hear some dialogue, allow the audience and staff to hear some comments. Again, a reminder, oh yes. I addressed the question to Amy that I would like to answer. Okay, you're right about the cost indoor versus outdoor. Yes, Ms. Jenkins, if you could. Sure. So and I believe, I'm sorry, Amy, I think that was the only question posed that has not been covered. Okay.
Okay, so about costs, I did consult with some patients as well as a cultivator. For a private personal grow, It's estimated that an outdoor would be about 2 pounds. This is per plant. So $400 for a plant yielding 2 pounds, and that's average, and this is for outdoor. And then for indoor, it does vary, as was previously stated. So for indoor, it is going to be a much smaller yield, about 3 to 4 ounces, but the costs are higher largely due to electrical, and that's about $750 per plant.
Is that per month? Or?
That is, no, that's per the life of the plant, yeah. So for the year. And then, if I may, there was a kind of a comment question on edibles. And one thing that I think is important to note when you're talking about access to children, I didn't cover this, but there's going to be a very robust track and trace program which will tag plants, will not tag private plants for patients, but will tag plants, and the idea is you will have a barcode that will follow the life of the product. So under a legalized framework or even a medical framework effective 2019, if a child is caught with a product, if it's purchased legally, there should be a barcode on it that will allow law enforcement to identify where it was purchased.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to repeat in case it wasn't heard, the indoor cost estimate, you're giving about $750 per plant, and the plant yield roughly 3 to 4 ounces and per year. And the outdoor plant, on average, again, others vary. We've heard testimony about different types of plants. For $400 a plant, you get about 2 pounds on an outdoor grow. And that, again, is approximation. So thank you. I believe that answers your question. So, again, I'll invite Councilmember Durham, would you like to...
I've got a couple questions of staff, too.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Let's ask questions of staff.
What was the law before we passed the ordinance in October of 2015? What was the law concerning personal cultivation or use in the state of California or in Yountville, or in Yountville?
So by we, do you mean the most recent marijuana legislation from California legislature?
What was
or just
allowed? What was allowed in Yountville before we passed that ordinance in October of 2015?
The Yountville ordinance doesn't address cultivation directly, but we have sort of administratively interpreted it to cover and prohibit cultivation for now. But as I understand it, it directly prohibits dispensaries, and I don't think it directly prohibits deliveries yet. But that is something that the council should address before 2018, when the state delivery licenses will go into effect.
So before October 2015, we could grow plants indoor in Yountville?
I'd have to read the ordinance again, but I actually don't think so.
Okay.
We'd have to double check.
Okay, very good. And then to the comment made, any other city in Napa County doing anything at this point? Because my confusion was that I saw that Napa had put a stop to the dispensary, but now...
They do not have any dispensaries. I think the point being made was that there was apparently discussions about a possible site if they do allow.
If they do, okay. And then the question then is, no other city in Napa County is allowing cultivation, is that correct?
Not to my knowledge, and your planning director might know more.
I believe St. Helena is the only one that allows indoor cultivation by patients and caregivers. It is limited to 100 square feet per patient, and it's limited to the number of plants as well. It's the exception to their ban on cultivation. I can't recall what Napa is doing, but I know that American Canyon does ban both patient cultivation and commercial cultivation, and Calistoga is sort of waiting to see what happens in the November election.
I think they did pass a ban to meet the March 1 deadline.
Right.
An urgency ordinance.
Indoor, outdoor, personal, and commercial.
Councilmember Durham?
No, that's it for questions.
Councilmember Mueller, either questions of staff? Let's start with questions of staff if you have any.
No questions, thanks.
Any questions of staff? Councilmember Dornbecker?
No.
Okay. Let's go back to any general comments. I know you like to start.
I will.
Councilmember Durham.
I just find it interesting that we're talking about a controlled substance in Yountville when Yountville thrives on a controlled substance, which is called wine. And I thought it was interesting when Amy at the very end said there's a barcode would be robust to track the plants. And I'm wondering, I don't think we have that program for a bottle of wine or a bottle of bourbon that's stolen out of the grocery store and stored under some kid's bed as well. So I find it very interesting because as a person who makes wine, I find that the school has no issue every year asking me for a donation of the wine to support the children. But when it comes to marijuana, I just think it's interesting. It's still a controlled substance, and I'm having a little problem seeing the difference between the two. I also, when I was the chair of the Zoning Design Review Board, thought that we should allow short-term rentals until I heard the whole story, until we had a hearing on it, and it made me more aware of the fact that I'm firmly behind the fact. Let me qualify, I own a hotel in Humboldt County. So I know the hospitality side and I know the cannabis side. And so even as a hotel owner, I don't see an issue with Airbnb, but to be honest, I see an issue with Airbnb in Yountville. I don't see it as an issue in Fortuna, where my business is. Same thing with the discussion we're having now. My ideas on how it should be controlled are different than my fact that I have no problem with people using it, especially for medical purposes. But I think we need to all be on the same level when we're talking about it and being aware of exactly what we're talking about as well. I have yet to read in the Napa Register of DUIs that were associated to marijuana as opposed to the 20 or 30 I see every month in the paper for wine. Also, I have yet to see any domestic violence calls in Yountville that have not been that have been a result of someone smoking marijuana as well. But I could be wrong, but that's my personal history. So that's my thought right now. I personally think that we have a great small town here, and I don't personally like the idea of cultivation. That doesn't mean I'm not open to it, but it also means that possibly delivery might be the answer to Yountville. I've seen a lot of amazing apps in the last couple of months that are coming out as a result of the November 2016 initiative. So maybe we need to think outside of the box and think that maybe delivery might be the answer instead of cultivation as well. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilmember Moeller? And just a reminder, even to the council, we're not making any decisions tonight, so we don't need to take any official positions if you don't want to address that.
Well, I think that, whether, regardless of what we end up coming up with, that for anyone who truly needs medical marijuana, that if we ban it, we're not limiting their access at all. There are still medical marijuana dispensaries. They're not that far away, within 20 miles, where we are not going to have any effect on that. So people will always be able to get the drug that they want by driving to these dispensaries. And I finally think it's really great that the state is going to be doing something about, having a pure and safe drug supply, at least as well characterized as it can be. Is it got fungus on it or mold, what the potency is? I mean, this is something that no one really knows. And I think that it's about time that they're doing that. I'm going to be patiently watching what they're doing. It'll be interesting to see in November what really happens. I think that whatever we do could change a lot depending on what happens, or if anything really happens in November. There's a lot of hurdles, as we know, to get something on the ballot. But I do think if it doesn't happen this year, it's happening soon. The outdoor grow, I think we heard from absolutely everybody that really is a problem. That there is smell, that there is a lot of risk to, people driving by and really seeing something. And if we haven't really had a problem, it could really lead to problems. What kind they're growing, I don't think, we're going to have any botanists who drive by and want to steal a plant know if they're getting the sativa or the other kind, or whatever it is. So I think that's kind of a moot point. Indoor, I think that under some very regulated circumstances, perhaps that's something that we could consider, but then it would have to be a lot of regulation. We heard about ventilation, we heard about electrical fires, we heard about if we have something that works for everybody in the town, we have to deal with the apartment complexes and all sorts of stuff. So I think that anything that we do will require regulation, and that's going to cost us money, and that has to be balanced. And I think Amy made a good point in terms of if we're going to allow it, what's the real reason we're doing it? Because if someone doesn't have access to it, that makes sense. But if we're really trying to do something and we're going to induce a lot more cost because they want to save some money, then we really have to look at the cost benefits of what we end up really thinking about. So it is going to be a difficult subject. It's going to take us some time to get there wherever we do get. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Councilmember Dornbecker.
This is something that is being discussed by all of the cities. I recently attended the League of California Cities, where I am vice chair of the Community Services Policy Committee. And we had a presentation by a gentleman who works primarily with the police chiefs all over the state on this very subject, medical marijuana. And he gave us some of the background about it, which leads to a point I'd like to make, which is that up until 1932, marijuana was legal and everyone had access to it. And it was federally legal. And then some of the states started to ban it. And when it reached a certain point, then the federal government acted and banned it federally. And according to this gentleman who works with the police chiefs, what they all think, according to what he said at our meeting, was that now the reverse is happening. The federal government is noticing that so many states are rethinking, and with the adult marijuana that has passed in several states and is likely to pass, as Amy said, in 11 to 14 more, eventually that will snowball and the federal government will take it off the list. And I really have to agree in some ways with Councilmember Durham. Alcohol is a very bad drug. It creates a lot of violence. It creates, and not to say that marijuana is a good drug, but nonetheless, I think that there is the perception, because of the years and years of recalculating what marijuana. I saw an ad that someone showed at this conference of a cough syrup from 1920s that contained marijuana, morphine, and something else. It was just and alcohol. I couldn't even believe it. So I'm concerned that what we're doing and this difficult struggle that we're going through together is really going to be a moot point very soon, possibly in our own state, and not in the too distant future in the country. So I hope that we're not engendering hard feelings and antagonism in our town. Our town is so wonderful. It is a small town. We have small houses and small back gardens. I can't imagine that there would ever be a huge grow house. We don't have any huge houses, and I can't imagine that we would ever have one of the vineyards changing over. But if it ever gets legalized federally, who knows? But I just think that the kind of angst that it is engendering, I think that that is harmful to our town as much as anything else. Anyway, for someone at this juncture, for someone who has a medical marijuana recommendation and it's a legitimate need for someone, for example, the gentleman who left, Steve, I met his wife. She had a stroke in her spine, and she's in pain all of the time. And so, and was taking, really hard pain medications, which, by the way, there's an awful lot of abuse of legal prescription drugs as well that are really bad for you too. So if someone finds relief from a natural product like medical marijuana, I would like to extend as much compassion as possible. And if that includes the fact that they financially cannot afford to purchase it, but they could grow 3 or 4 plants for their own use and no one else's, I'm willing to consider that in our discourse. So that's how I feel about it. I think that, as we go down the road, in the not too distant future, this will be just an exercise in legislating. Anyway, that's how I feel.
Thank you. I'm going to begin by thanking Amy Jenkins, Sergeant Greenberg, and Battalion Chief Hawks, who still has a report to give us in a few minutes. And thank all of you that are still here, but also the folks that have had to leave for other reasons. What I'm really appreciative of is the type of dialogue we're having, the topics we're talking about. We're not talking about what's the best way to make money on this issue, the sales tax or whatever else it is. We are talking about how it's going to impact our community if we act a certain way or not. Compassion is a word that we keep repeating, and it's totally appropriate that, we, I think, as a council, we're pretty much on the verge of doing what other jurisdictions have done, which is ban cultivation, delivery, everything to do with marijuana outright. We, I think, have taken very appropriate action to consider if that's the right thing for our community. We may get to that point. We may decide, yes, it is, that banning it is the right thing for our community. And that won't make everyone happy. But nor will allowing cultivation make everyone happy. I think Councilmember Durham's idea of considering options for delivery maybe is a solution to avoiding cultivation concerns that we have addressed tonight. We've heard testimony about from seasoned experts. Ironically, delivery was one of the things that I thought we had to prohibit right away, because we have to sit up here and evaluate for the worst case scenario, how is the worst person with the worst intentions going to behave? Not the people that are, Mr. Stewart trying to take care of his medical challenges, and the couple that was here earlier and had very real health issues, and they're not abusing it. But we do need to regulate those that will try to abuse it. And that's where we come into conflict with the intention of doing good by our neighbors and having to control the unintended consequences. So maybe banning cultivation, but allowing some type of delivery system that keeps the affordability and the availability appropriate to the right people. That might be a direction that our conversation goes. I think we should, as a council and staff, look into that if there is a direction. And Amy and the other professionals in Sacramento hopefully are looking at a lot of different options, because you're clearly hearing testimony over and over again at the local level. It's much easier to make these decisions in Sacramento when you're not right here at the very local level, talking to your friends and neighbors. So I'm still very open-minded about how we proceed. I'm more open-minded the more I've heard. I have an older brother that was 25 years in the Oakland Police Department, so I appreciate the law enforcement perspective and the concerns about the associations with all drugs, marijuana and others. But I also see there is an evolution of thinking. There is a compassionate use that might be appropriate. It's how we get there. I mean, if this was easy, folks, the country wouldn't be struggling so much with it. So we may come up with a course of action that needs to be tweaked after we find out, does it serve the community the way we want it to? So, we're not one meeting away from a solution, I don't think. But I believe that this meeting has been a great step forward. I think even more dialogue is going to happen with our residents, with our neighboring jurisdictions. And to be honest, Yountville is not afraid to be the cutting edge of decision making. I'm proud of the fact that we take thoughtful consideration on a variety of topics, and we are willing to be out front. We're also willing to take a back seat and observe and let others move forward, and then we maybe make a smarter decision down the road because of our timeliness. So if we find a solution that works for our community and we're ready to move, I'm not worried about what is going to happen in November of 2016. I don't think we're ever going to lose, to your concern, Councilmember Dornbecker, we're not going to lose the local control of the conditions of use or operation. I think that's where it's going to get very detailed in how we control impacts. If the trending is accurate, the state's going to allow this at a much higher level, and then it's going to get even more important that we have an educated perspective before we act. So I know that it's not terribly satisfying that we aren't coming to some outright conclusion, but I think that it's appropriate that we aren't. So again, I thank all of you for participating in the dialogue, and will continue to. I certainly welcome our members of the public to continue to provide information, their background, their thoughts on this. We will certainly make it very well known when we're going to address this again. Steve, I don't think we have a very specific timeline yet, unless you had a desire to see this on any particular agenda of a date certain.
Staff's desire is to put together the ordinance based on the direction provided by the council. So I would suggest to you that we're definitely not moving anytime soon.
But what I would like to see is if staff has enough information from the conversation tonight and the comments of the council to put some structure to, maybe a loose structure to elements, whether it be looking further into delivery options, whether it be, as I think I would agree with Councilmember Moeller, that outdoor it sounds unlikely, outdoor growth. So if there's enough feedback to get some kind of
I think there's
summary, at least.
We've heard that there's what I would say staff has heard that an interest in looking at it. What I would say outdoor does not seem to be fairly consistent. So that would be something we'd look at. I do sense a little more willingness to consider indoor with an appropriate regulatory structure. And tonight we've heard an opportunity that you want to revisit potentially allowing delivery. So those are some things that Mike and I can work with and bring back.
But I'll also just repeat again, because we are asking for some structure, some wording, that does not guarantee that's the direction we're going to go, frankly. We are still putting the information together and the content together. We still have to evaluate that content once we put it together. So, yes, Councilmember Mueller.
No, I agree with that. I think that maybe it isn't an ordinance. Maybe it's an outline structure or a framework for an ordinance, as we like to say in government speak. And the reason I like that because a lot of people talked to me about this issue, and they said, so what are you going to do? Well, what is your plan? And then, I said, well, we don't really have a plan. We would definitely like for you to come and share your thoughts with us. So maybe if we do start crafting some kind of a framework, we'll have something more concrete for people to come and, specifically talk about. And so I think that is a very good next step. Sometimes it's hard to react to just everything, but if we start focusing it a little bit, it might help focus the conversation more as we share it with the public. So
Yeah, I mean, this is the intent of tonight. I feel like this has been successful. The intent of tonight is to become better educated, and that's not just the council; it's all of us. And I absolutely feel that we did that and we achieved that. And thank you to, again, not only our professionals, but for everybody that has either personal or anecdotal evidence to help us with the dialogue. So with that, I'm going to close this item. Again, thank you to all of our presenters. Mr. Stewart, we'll have additional time for dialogue, and you're certainly welcome to email us if you have additional, but we do have several other items to get to tonight. So we're going to move ahead to our next presentation, and I realize that many of you were here for this item, so I'll do my standard killing of time while some folks go watch the Giants game. Yes, we're actually, I'll go ahead and recess for 3 minutes. So we'll come back here at 8:58. 3 minutes, please. 7:58. Thank you. Not an hour. And we are back from our brief break, and we'll reconvene with our next presentation, which is our CAL FIRE Public Safety Quarterly Report. Battalion Chief Hawks.
Mayor Dunbar and council members, thanks for having me again tonight. Steve Hawks with the first quarter of 2016 fire report. For first quarter, Yountville Station responded to 427 calls, and of those, 78 calls were within the town limits, and 60 of those calls were for medical aids, which again is our typical response. So of the 427 calls that we responded to, the 78 represents 18% of our call volume for the 3-month period. Fortunately, the first quarter was pretty slow for us. We did respond to one structure fire up by Lake Berryessa, and crews were able to make a quick response and save a portion of the house to the area of the fire was already involved in at the time of their arrival. Special events, we assisted with the Breakfast with the Bunny and Touch a Truck event, and as always, we really enjoy participating in events with the town, and we look forward to those, and we'll continue to do so in the future. Training, we had a pretty unique opportunity. There was a large commercial structure in Napa City, I think it was First Street and Silverado Trail, that was going to be demolished, and the owners of it allowed the fire department to use it for training. And it's unique because we don't get that opportunity a lot, and it's pretty close to a real life scenario that we could get in a training environment without putting fire in a building. So we used it to train on cutting holes in the roof for ventilation, to simulate letting the heat and smoke and fire gases out of the structure to allow the fire attack crews to come in a more tenable environment. We stretched hose throughout the building to simulate fire attack. We practiced with doing search and rescue of finding trapped victims within the structure and removing them, as well as firefighters should they unfortunately happen to go down inside the structure and we have to make a rescue. So we used it for a lot of different training to gather a lot of different experience, and very invaluable, and also gave us the opportunity, which we don't have all the time, is to train with our partners in Napa City Fire Department. Not one fire department in the country is large enough that they can handle every emergency that exists by themselves, and we rely on each other to help mitigate the incident. And so it gives us that opportunity to train together and build that bond and trust that we need when we respond to an emergency. So it was a great experience and good knowledge gained. And one training that we do have coming up is going to be here in the 1st of May over at our training grounds here on the Silverado Trail. We're going to bring in a burn trailer where we'll have simulated fires in a controlled environment that are ignited by propane. And firefighters can make simulated fire attacks on that, and be another good training experience for them. Safety message for this quarter is, if you haven't done so, we already passed daylight savings time, but we'd like to remind everyone to change the batteries in your smoke detectors. And smoke detectors generally have a 10-year lifespan on them, so if you haven't looked at your smoke detector in a while to see how old it is, maybe it's a good time to do that. And if it's longer than 10 years old, then probably a good time to change that out. And we're partnering with the Kiwanis Club to purchase smoke detectors and install them with our fire department personnel. We are winding our way into what we have traditionally called our fire season, although we really no longer have a fire season that's associated with the summer months anymore. We have a year-round fire season, so we have changed the terminology to summertime preparedness and wintertime preparedness. So we're getting closer to our summertime preparedness, where we're going to bring on seasonal staff and staff up additional equipment in preparation for our higher fire danger time of the year. And leading up to that point, we'd like to remind all residents that it's a good time now to get out and provide that defensible space around your structure of clearing vegetation, the flammable vegetation, dry grass, mowing it down. Just make sure you're doing it responsibly in the morning hours and when the humidity's up and so forth, because a lot of people try to do the right thing by providing that clearance, but maybe do it at the wrong time of the day when the humidity is low and they inadvertently start a fire. So we want to make sure that when you're trying to do the right thing, that you do it in a safe manner. And that's all I have for the first quarter. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions? Councilmember Mueller?
I don't have any question, but I'd like to make a comment, and it's about the burning of the vines in the vineyards. I've already gone, and I understand the Air Resource Board is what has approved that, but right. I talked to them because I'm trying to complain to somebody because I think it's horrific, and it was really bad this year. And they say that the local fire department is the one who issues the actual permits. So I don't know if this is true. I really can't even figure out how it works because everyone's kind of going like this. But I think it's a real problem. I hear when I complain to the county supervisors, it really shouldn't be a problem, but when it really smells, they're burning the irrigation lines along with the vines, even though I'm on the trash board and we have special irrigation hose pickup. So what can we really do? Because this is not just a personal pet peeve. It's a serious issue in our community.
Well, there's two agencies that regulate burning, and one of them being the Bay Area Air Quality Management District.
Right.
And they regulate burning year-round, and they have certain categories that they allow burning for, and they issue a permit. They have 3 different permits, and you can get them at any of our fire stations or online on their website. And they have different categories and then different months out of the year that you're allowed to burn depending on what category you want to burn in. Agricultural burning, which you're specifically addressing, is usually during the summer months that they allow that, only if it's for diseased crops. During the winter months, they'll allow it if you're removing your vineyard and replacing it with a new one and you want to burn the old plants. They'll allow that during the winter months. We regulate burning from May 1st every year. It's a hard date, May 1st, until the end of fire season. There's that term again, fire season, but it's an unknown date at the end of the year, and it really depends on the weather and the fire danger as to when we'll lift our burn ban or regulation on burning. So May 1st to sometime around end of October, maybe early November, we regulate burning. Beyond that, during the winter months, we don't regulate burning at all. So did I answer your question good enough? Or
I think the Bay Area, the Air Resources Board is what you pointed to as the...
And they pointed me to him, so I'm still going in circles because...
Well, during the summer months,
I'm trying to
all
solve
we're
a
concerned
community problem here, so I don't have
from
to
May
do
1st to the end of fire season, what we're concerned about is when people burn is that they're doing it safely and they're not going to let or allow the fire to escape their control and then become a major wildland fire that burns, many acres and threatens homes and stuff.
Maybe we can put this on staff and discuss it in more detail another time.
Well, the Bay Area Air Quality Board, or whatever the official title is, they're the ones that are giving the spare the air days, correct?
Yes, they do the spare the air days.
They would be the regulatory agency that says you can. It makes sense they would be the agency that says you can burn your vineyard on a day that's not a spare the air day.
Right. They have a 24-hour burn number that you can call and find out if it's a
I
burn
started
day or
with
not.
them. They sent me to the California Air Resource Board, who sent me to you. So I'm still...
Okay, good luck
Anyway,
with that.
yeah, exactly.
Any other questions? I did have one question. The status of, hotshot teams and use of Department of Corrections...
Our fire crews.
Fire crews. There was a suspension of that for a period of time, I believe, but is that up and running, that program?
Well, we have Department of Correction and Rehabilitation fire crews that are staffed by a fire captain with CAL FIRE that takes them out to wildland fires. And with the realignment of some of the prison population, it has impacted our ability to maintain certain levels of our crews within our crews. Normally, they're staffed with about 15 inmate firefighters, and because of the realignment, some may be down to 12 or 13 inmate firefighters on
But
them.
they're still active, and you still use them when called upon for wildfire.
Absolutely, that's their primary mission is wildland fires, but they can also be called out for flooding and other events as needed.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think you've fulfilled your obligations for this evening.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.
The same cannot be said, however, for Sergeant Crawford. Please come forward with your quarterly report.
Hello again. I'm glad to see that my PowerPoint's up here because I didn't come prepared like the good chief with paper copies. So we'll get started with the first quarter informational report of the Sheriff's Department here at the Downville Station. And much like last year and hopefully many years to come, our violent crime rate is quite low. You can see from the numbers there, we've had no homicides, no rapes, no robberies. We did have one assault with a weapon and 4 simple assaults, meaning, generally speaking, very minor injuries or no weapons involved, for a total of 5 crimes against persons during this time period.
Oh, in February.
What I did in this one is much like last time, I did a little bit of a statistical analysis. I performed a little bit more this time. And in order to give us a real feeling for what these numbers mean, I compared them both to the immediately previous quarter, which would have been the fourth quarter of 2015, and also compared it to the first quarter of 2015. So we get an idea of, generally speaking, what goes on January, February, March in consecutive years, as well as what happened in October, November, December. And again, violent crime stays pretty low here, which is a wonderful thing. Homicides 0, 0, 0 for robberies, assaults. Again, we've had 1 with a weapon in 3/4 of statistical data. Some simple assaults and 1 instance of domestic violence. So our numbers for this quarter are right on track with what they generally are. As far as crimes against property, knock on wood, it's been fairly quiet. February did have a little bit of an uptick. You can see burglaries, again, non-existent this quarter, which is nice. Petty thefts, we did have a few, total of 7. Grand thefts, which is any theft over $950, we had 2. 1 automobile theft, and then we had 4 or 5 cases of vandalism. So, again, comparing it to the first quarter of last year, the numbers are pretty much identical. Burglaries, we did have a couple last year. Petty thefts were up this year as far as the first quarter goes, and actually compared also to the fourth quarter of last year. Grand thefts are more or less the same. Again, it's kind of the issue with statistical analysis when you have such a small data pool. I mean, you could have a 100% increase and go from 1 to 2, and it sounds kind of alarming when you think of percentages, but realistically, it's not much of maybe a little more to do about nothing. But in any event, vandalisms, we did have the 5. First quarter last year, we didn't have any. Fourth quarter of last year, we did have 3. And as far as calls for service go, 203 in January, as you can see, 271 February, March, almost 300. Reports stayed around late teens to the early 20s as far as numerically. Arrests, we made 7 through the quarter, 3 citations for misdemeanor offenses, 23 citations for traffic, and 125 for parking, which obviously tends to be a favorite subject in Yountville. As far as calls for service go, comparatively speaking, we're about the same. We're a little higher than the last quarter, a little bit lower than the first quarter of last year. Reports, we're a little higher. Don't know why that would be. Arrests, ironically enough, are pretty much the same for every quarter we looked at. Citations are down a bit as far as the misdemeanor citations. Traffic citations, I don't know what happened in the first quarter of 2015. It's a pretty high number. It may have been we did some directed traffic enforcement, something we're contemplating again as we get complaints about stop signs and speeding, that sort of thing. And the citations as far as parking were more or less the average of the 3/4 if you look at it. Collisions, again, we're very lucky here. We had 0 fatal collisions, which is always nice. The injury collisions can be anything from a complaint of pain to something fairly significant. It includes hospital stays. In this case, they're mostly just complaint of pain type collisions of the 2 we had. And non-injury collisions, we had 3. And again, basically the same as what we look at historically. Non-injuries, we're looking at 3 or 4. Injuries, again, 1 or 2 for a quarter, and no fatals in any of the 3/4 that we looked at. Officer-initiated activities. This includes things like traffic stops, what we call pedestrian checks or patrol checks as well, vehicle checks, parking issues, self-generated. We're looking at about 223 of the, this is broken down just a little bit between Yountville deputies, or those deputies are assigned specifically to Yountville, and then what we call the Valley deputies, which are the deputies that also work in other areas of the county. So you can see with about 223 self-initiated activities by the Yountville deputies, 12 by the county folks, and 235 total. As far as traffic stops go, we made a total of 84. You can see that we issued 23 citations and 61 warnings for a 27 to 73% difference in ratio there. And again, more or less, the numbers are pretty comparable. Traffic stops, we were higher than the 4th quarter of last year, but lower than the 1st quarter. Pedestrian checks, more or less the same. Patrol checks, seen a drop-off. A patrol check is something that can be categorized or recorded in different ways. Oftentimes, patrol check just means you drive by a place, maybe take a look, see if everything looks all right. Some people might log that, some people might not. It's something we do essentially regularly as we patrol. Just, might check a parking lot, stop and check a business. Something seems out of place. But oftentimes we do it without even notifying anybody. So the numbers are not necessarily all-inclusive of what we do as far as those go. The vehicle checks, more or less the same. Parking issues, more or less the same. So I thought it might be interesting to, I took this picture, by the way, about 6 o'clock in the morning. And this is actually being used to recruit deputies to come to the Sheriff's Department this time to show how beautiful it is here. Right?
Right.
The town of Yountville represented in the back window. You can barely see it, but there it is, representing the Sheriff's Department. So I thought some other statistics that might be kind of interesting. I actually contemplated bringing an envelope and doing the Great Karnak. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but anyway, if you could hit the button. So 4. So these statistics are sort of about your Yountville deputies. We've got 4 of us, so that's kind of an easy one, right? Next number. 81. You might wonder what the 81 is. Well, 81 is the total number of years of experience that you have at the Yountville station in law enforcement. I have over 20. Cal Valente has close to 30. Sergio Carrillo is around 18, and John Zimmerman is about 12. 2 and 2, which Chuck Woolery, right? 2 and 2, remember that? It's not quite the same, but so 2 and 2 in this case means there's 2 of us that have bachelor's degrees. Which is a nice thing, and there's actually, you have 2 deputies that are bilingual here. Myself and Sergio Carrillo both speak Spanish, so it comes in helpful. 18. I can't remember what 18 is. What is 18? Isn't that funny? Oh, man. What's that? What's that? I should have brought the card. It might have came to me. I don't know. 18. What is that? Oh, 18. Sometimes today, 18. Whenever it's marijuana day, it's 18 hours. But the 18 is actually years of investigative experience. I had, like I mentioned before, I had 8 years of investigative experience total between being a detective and a detective sergeant. Cal Valente had about 5 years of experience in investigations bureau. His specialty actually was one that takes a special person. He investigated crimes against children for the most part. So it takes a special kind of officer or deputy to be able to do that. And Sergio Carrillo actually had several years of investigative experience in gang crimes. So anything from assaults to homicides and that sort of thing when he worked down south. So that's what 18 means. I'm glad I remember. And I think that's the last number, yes? So there it is. Anybody, any questions? I'm obviously available.
Any questions from the council?
I just have one, Sergeant, please. It's about the number of calls for service versus the number of warrants or arrests, or what are most of the calls for service?
So a call for service can be anything. Anytime anybody calls or walks into the station, it can be anything from what we call a citizen assist, which just means somebody has a question, you know, where can we find something, or whatever. Oftentimes we don't even log those. But for instance, this morning I fielded a call from a young man who was having some issues with neighbors in his apartment complex, and he wanted some advice on what to do. So that could be a call for service. It's not something that's really documented much past what we call a dispatch card, which is kind of a archaic term. It's now all computerized, but back in the day when I started, the dispatchers actually had little cards. They were 3x5, like 3x7 or something, and they would write down the times and the cards and who called and that sort of thing. So calls for service can be just a dispatch card. So it could be a noise complaint, it could be a dog at loose, it could be any number of things.
I see.
And then obviously it could also be an assault, it could be a domestic violence incident, it could be a traffic collision, it could be a safety hazard, and any number of these things can lead into what the other number you see, which is reports, which is the next highest number. If something is either falls within our policy that something has to be documented, you know, like a domestic violence or something of that nature, or if it's just kind of a good idea that it's documented because of you know, to sort of memorialize the information for somebody else to be able to research later, for victims that need to provide, you know, documentation to an insurance company that something was stolen, any number of things. And then, of course, the arrests, you sort of filter it out even further, and then you get to the arrest category, which is obviously even less than that.
Well, thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you very much for the report.
You bet. My pleasure.
We are going to move on and start talking about the arts. Thank you, Battalion Chief. And I'll welcome up our Arts Commission for the annual report. Welcome.
Thank you. Kimberly Cook for Yountville Arts. And now for something completely different. I will give you a brief review of what we were up to last year. We installed a total of 7 new sculptures on the Art Walk. We sold 1 sculpture and received a commission of $1,800. We had 1 sculpture stolen from the Art Walk, and 1 sculpture was damaged by people who climbed on it, and it had to be removed by the artist. With the help of one of our involved residents, we started something new, an Instagram contest for photos taken with our Art Walk sculptures. That was an idea somebody brought to us in one of our meetings, and why not? In December, we initiated an open call for artists on a website that invites artists to submit their works to the Art Walk. It's provided us with an average of 4 new submissions every couple months. And so we're working to make selections, contact the artist, and bring the pieces to town. It's not a fast process, but it definitely brings us some good quality artwork in the long run. We held our 3rd annual Art Sip and Stroll. It's not the one 4 days ago, but the one a year ago. It was a great success. We doubled our attendance at that one and increased the funds raised for our arts funds. We had a total of 21 artists last year and sold almost 600 bracelets for $10 each. The book club held their monthly meetings, and they attended a couple movies together after reading the books that matched the movies. And another successful Yountville Reads was held in the Community Center Plaza. We had 3 shows in the gallery. The town's 50th anniversary timeline was on display for a couple months, and people really enjoyed that one. We had the Valley Unseen, which was a show where artists were invited to interpret what Napa Valley means to them. And Michael Scher provided a gallery full of his photographs for a show titled Perspectives. And the artist reception for that one was held in conjunction with the tree lighting in December. Last but not least, we began our Beyond a Mural project. We again used the online call for entries website and received over 40 submissions. Great effort was put into narrowing the list down to the 3 talented artists, and then we invited the public to make the selection with us and for us. It was a huge success, and we're on our way to making this project happen and bring fine art to the dark and dreary underpass on California. Yountville Arts is a tireless commission with vision and ideas galore and the tenacity not to give up and to work until we make it happen. We sincerely appreciate your support, and we will continue to bring fun, elegant, and important projects to the fabric of our town. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments from the council?
I
Councilmember
just
Dornbecker?
am wondering how Art Sip and Stroll a few days ago is looking in terms of numbers of people and things. Was it successful too?
Visually, well, to start off, we had about 40 booths with artists this time. We did not have as many wineries participate as in previous years. Looking at the event and watching what was happening, there were a lot more people in town. We sold about the same number of bracelets, but they were $20 instead of $10 this year, so that helped. But I think there were a lot more people that attended that were here for the art event. And so they didn't necessarily taste, but the general feedback we've gotten in just checking with artists that afternoon is that it was very successful for the artists. Good. That we had a lot of sales. We had a better quality of artists this year. We continue to reach out to art organizations in the wider Bay Area, and it's a juried exhibition, so we're getting better and better quality, and so I think it's getting a better reputation as the years go by.
I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you for helping,
so much.
too.
Well, but I thought it was really wonderful. Great job, all of you.
I did hear from a couple of restaurant owners that were very happy with the business side of it.
Good.
So the fact that they weren't being asked to do anything.
Well, they have been asked.
Well,
they have not chosen to participate.
But those that didn't have to participate because they participated in virtually everything else that's asked of them, they appreciated the fact they were actually able to do, strong business throughout the afternoon. So that was a plus for them, and it might encourage them to participate in the future.
I hope so.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you to the commission that are here tonight for all the work that you continue to do to support the arts. Continuing our art theme, we're going to go to the first of 2 public hearings now, and we're going to consider a public art program for the Yountville Municipal Code.
Mayor, Council, just briefly, I'd like to provide a brief introduction before we get started on this process. This has been a great opportunity for staff, myself, Samantha, but also a great opportunity for us to work with a commission for our management fellow, who I'm going to turn over shortly. As part of her professional growth and development was an opportunity to provide meaningful staff support and, more important, support and research to a citizen commission. So I'm given a slight preface, but I also think it's really important to know that this particular process, and one that Chair Cook will attest to, has been something on an agenda for a number of years going back, as to looking at how do we work on improving and sustaining the arts. So this was a great opportunity for the commission, staff, and our management fellow to do the level of research, evaluate, argue, have thoughtful discussion, and throw certain things out before they worked on ending up with a recommendation before you. And the group collectively has also had to work coming back through Sam, through myself, and through the town attorney's office to make sure that the end product and recommendation that is coming to you meets all of those criteria. So a long introduction, but one that I think is appropriate, especially because it really was a learning process for all of us involved in the process. And with that, Priya will be making the initial presentation with support from the Arts Commission.
Very good.
Thank you, Steve, and good evening, Mayor and Town Council. My name is Priya Nixon, and as Steve mentioned, I'm the Management Fellow. When I first had my first day here, I was told I'm going to be working with the Arts Commission, and I come from a family. My mom is an artist, so arts has been part of my life. So before we get started, I just want to reiterate, we had a really successful event at Art Sip and Stroll, and we actually have a few new pieces on our art walk. So take a look. There's a new one right at Vandeleur, Two Fish. That's really great. And then we have Bard Spiral, which is right outside of Java Hut 2. So beautiful pieces, and I think we have a few more coming as well. So it was a great event, and I think it was a testament to the fact that the Arts Commission was established in 2009, and between 2009 and today, I think it's fair to say that we have a very program-focused commission, and they do a lot of work. So some of the programs that they do are, our rotating art walk, and there's a lot that goes into that, including the maintenance of the artwork, the administrative side of contacting and communicating with artists. And I have to say, with our new online call for entry, we've really expanded our reach, and I feel like we're getting our name out, and we're pulling artists from Oregon and all over the country, so it's really exciting. And we also have a really robust literary program that has, I think, really flourished within the past few years, and that's all because of the commission. They see a need for arts in the community, and they act on it. And they rely a lot on volunteers as well, so I want to make sure our volunteers get credit too. So there is a place for art in Yountville. We say, art is synonymous with wine and hotels, and that's very true. And we see benefits beyond people creating a deep connection. During Art Sip and Stroll, as mentioned, the businesses gained a benefit of people staying in town and staying longer and enjoying all the amenities that we have. So I included in the staff report a handout that talks about why arts is good for business as well. We do have a lot of tourists, but it's so wonderful to hear from our residents that they like or even dislike a certain piece. We have a lot of moving pieces, so I appreciate that. So with that, the commission has established a need for funding that's more sustainable to promote some of these programs that we have, but also to expand. I mentioned that we do have a stipend that we give to artists, and there's increased maintenance, and we're getting a lot of requests for new pieces of art on the art walk. So there's a lot of opportunity, and most importantly, we have our underpass fine art mural installation, which happened within the past year. So there is a need for a source of funding, and the commission has asked staff to kind of review what public art ordinance would look like. Now, Yountville is a little unique. We are nearing our build-out, so the opportunity for commercial buildings to come in that are new is limited, and that's important because upon reviewing the different models, traditionally, public art ordinances pull from commercial projects and residential projects as well. So the commission directed staff, myself and Sam and Steve, to kind of look at how can we be creative and come up with a model that would work for the town. So what we've done is look at building permit history for the past 3 years, and we've looked at what that project valuation is and attached a percentage. Traditionally, most municipalities will pull 1% of commercial projects. If they choose to do residential ones, residential project valuations, it varies based on the community. So I was able to pull all that information together and present what that sort of trend analysis was. And the commission and Kim Cook and other commissioners will talk about the dialogue that happened during this process. But what we're recommending right now is 1% of commercial project valuations be required to take part in this public art fee. So what is this fee and what does it mean? So there are two ways to satisfy this requirement. If you are a commercial applicant, you will have the option of either paying an in lieu fee that is 1% of the project valuation. This project valuation is verified and determined by town staff that adhere to building valuation codes. And what this does is this money will allow the Arts Commission to build up reserves to consider expanding certain programmatic opportunities that they see. So it's an easy way to participate. The other option is the applicant can place art. And it's a great opportunity to build or to add on to that project an artistic feature. It's very important to note that this part of placing art is it has to be publicly viewable. That's very important. And it has to be 1% of the valuation. However, you may ask, well, what if their project valuation isn't that big, 1%? What can you do with that? Well, there's nothing saying that you can't, you can't exceed that, but you do have the option to place the in lieu fee. And it's really important. I mentioned, the public process is critical to the Arts Commission's success. I think you saw at the underpass mural presentation, there were a lot of people that came and that shared their opinions. So we do all the art. If the applicant decides to place art, it has to be approved by the Arts Commission, and that is a publicly held meeting, and we do accept and encourage comments, and that goes for all the art that we place on the art walk as well. So that's very important to us, and you'll hear more about that from Chair Cook. But I think, I think that pretty much sums up what we're trying to get at, that art is important in Yountville, and this creates a framework for that to be sustainable. So with that, I will hand it over to Steve.
Before we go to the commissioners, I want to invite because I have one question I want to ask you. Any questions from council at this point, from Priya? Councilmember Muller?
Well, I don't know when the time to ask it, but I'm very curious about the 1%, how much that's going to be.
Well, let's hold off on that. Just specific to the comments so far, because I think you may get some more answers from the rest of the presentation, and I probably should save mine too, but I'm not going to. Major renovations. I mean, what's the threshold for? Since, as you pointed out, we have almost no opportunities for new commercial. So, what is the trigger for what you're proposing?
I'm going to provide a real simple clarification to make sure everybody understands. It is a building permit, so it's the action of pulling a building permit for a commercial enterprise built. So
in layman's terms, describe what that means.
That could be as simple as a renovation of an existing building or a brand new project, but it's a commercial project, so it would be something in our commercially zoned. So it would be automatically assessed along with a number of other fees that are associated when you pull the building permit. So that's the trigger mechanism, and it would apply.
So a hotel renovation of rooms would trigger.
That is correct.
Okay.
Could be an electrical modification. Like I say, it could be an update, a modernization, but it is based not necessarily on what. There is a formulatic process that the International Building Code establishes for describing building valuation, and that's what it's built on.
Okay.
The other thing I want to make sure and clarify, in this particular case, this would be a restricted fund that would actually have to be managed by the Arts Commission separate of the regular fund, and that's because it's technically an impact fee. So we have to be able to show and account for the fact that the funding that was derived from the fees went for the purpose that it was intended. So I just want a couple clarifications there.
Okay. And then, so we have a little more presentation to go.
So what I'll do now is invite our commission members up to speak more about this project.
Please do.
Kimberly Cook. I'm here on behalf of the Yountville Arts Commission, who is behind me tonight in their support. Thank you for council members for taking the time to consider our proposal. Last year, with all her usual enthusiasm, PRIA began thoroughly researching the usage of public arts program fees in other communities and was able to submit to us a strong and sound proposal. We have worked through several drafts with her and with staff and present this to you tonight with our full commission's support. The comment is always made that our town is already built out, and pretty much that's true, but if you think how much change has come to town since 2009, when Yountville Arts Commission started in a town that was pretty much already built out, we have the French Laundry Garden, Heston, Stewart Cellars, JCB, R&D, Hotel Yountville, RH. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities because there's always a lot of renovation, and there's a lot more projects to come, big or small. There will probably not be huge changes, but there will be small projects and remodels of significant size, and we would like to see public art be a part of those properties. By encouraging our commercial property owners and developers to include public art on their properties as they build or remodel, we are ensuring that public art will always hold a place in Yountville. The proposed ordinance will be a catalyst that holds the public arts in Yountville together, as it will encourage developers to consider the arts as they are encouraged to incorporate art into their buildings, landscaping, fencing, frontages, public spaces in endlessly creative ways. They will have the flexibility to apply the proposed art fee to almost any part of their project, using their imagination as well as their architect's creativity. With a beautiful partnership, we will be able to build with our businesses in town. Yountville Arts has shown you our dedication by bringing a variety of art experiences to town to benefit visitors and residents alike, and ask for your support to strengthen our town's commitment to the arts and provide a secure source of additional support for years to come. We did not take this on lightly, and we feel passionately that in the long run, being able to enhance our town with high quality, actively maintained public artworks will bring joy and beauty to Yountville and benefit residents and businesses alike.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Well written and well presented.
Thank you.
Any other presentation before I open the public hearing, Priya, or is that the silent support from the rest of the commission? You may.
I'm not part of the commission, so that's a...
Oh, not yet then. You can't talk yet.
Well, that's why I was asking.
All right. No, you got to wait. I have to open the public hearing and let you walk right back up here. So with that, I'll open the public hearing portion of this and invite any member of the public who would like to address this. Please come forward.
Thank you. My name is Devin Avery. I'm sort of an ad hoc member. I go to a lot of the Arts Commission meetings, and I'm a real proponent of what they're doing. And I just want to add to some of the comments that Kim made, in that one of the reasons that I have attended and been a part of this is that I think that the arts in Yountville are more than just a help to the businesses and nice for the residents. I think it's going to drive what Yountville is known for. I mean, right now we're known for restaurants. That's great. We've got to have more than that, in my opinion. It's worked well so far, but I really think that we need something beyond restaurants, and art to me is it. We're already there. We have a lot of it. But the more that comes in, I think people eventually are going to say, let's go to Yountville to see the art, not just to have dinner. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, Olivia Everett. I'm CEO of Arts Council Napa Valley, and I've had the pleasure of speaking to Priya a little bit about public art ordinances and also helping the City of Napa and American Canyon on public art ordinance. And I just wanted to say that I'm really excited you guys are considering this, and that the Art Commission has spent the time to put this together, and staff. I've seen since the adoption in 2009 of City of Napa's public art ordinance, how that's began to impact really their revitalization of the downtown. Whether it was temporary programs or permanent programs, I would advocate for both. That really helped to stimulate their town, but I think what's important is to what the previous speaker was saying, is that it's an opportunity also to have a unique identity beyond, the businesses and really create a legacy and a history for Yountville moving forward. And almost in a way, the art you install every year is a time capsule for generations moving forward of what was happening then and what's important and what Yountville stands for. So I'm really excited to see that. I encourage you to consider this, consider their proposal, and again, I also, the other thought I had was that what's exciting about both having the in lieu option and paying the fee is in Napa, for instance, we've seen a little bit of one-upsmanship coming from the development community, where at first they might have been hesitant, fee or art or what is this going on. There's a little bit of one-upsmanship where people start exceeding the requirement and really seeing the value that it brings to their business and to their development. So that's exciting. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I know you two have been sitting over there all this time, like Olivia was.
I first wanted to, my name is Chris DiNatale. I'm the Foundation Director at the Lincoln Theater. And I first want to commend the Art Commission as well as the staff. Having seen some of this process, I think it was a great dialogue, and they really did their due diligence to figure out what worked and what was right. And just to follow up on some of the other comments, Yountville is an art destination. We're home to the biggest performing arts center in Napa Valley, where 25% of visitors come from out of town to see our show. So I think this is only right to continue arts as a mecca in Yountville and as a destination for tourists and locals alike. A strong dedication here. We have over 150 active volunteers, many of which who live in Yountville. So I think it's right, and I think the support is there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Welcome, Vincent.
This is Zeus, part of the Arts Commission, but as a resident here for the past 3 to 4 years, we've been really inspired, my wife and I, by how the town supports the arts and how the arts have fundamentally shaped the built and living environment, something I was really passionate about during my architecture and development days. So I want to thank the town's support, continuing supporting what we do, and the commission under Kim's leadership and with the staff's tremendous effort had been working on this ordinance for a long time, and we're really looking forward to the progress on this. So thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Seeing no one else, I'll close the public hearing and invite discussion by the council. Let's start on this side. Councilmember Dornbecker, your thoughts?
Well, I have to really give great kudos to the Arts Commission and the literary branch and the art walk and all of the art. The only thing that distresses me is that I don't feel like we have a suitable gallery on an ongoing basis for art. And if that were something that this could help to make happen, I'd be extra delighted. But anyway, I'm very in support of this personally.
Thank you. Councilmember Durham.
Priya, I've got a question. And also, I love walking into the office because of your excitement constantly at all times. But can you speak to the temporary part that the one speaker, is that an aspect of this as well in terms of what's going on with, is the sign at RH considered temporary art? At the RH construction site?
I'm gonna let Priya go, and I'm gonna be prepared to support her.
So the answer to that is the requirement to fulfill the requirement for this proposed ordinance, you have to be submitting a building permit. So we only pull the requirement if you actually have a building permit with a project valuation attached to it. Regarding the status of someone's building permit, I would refer you to the planning department because they're really in charge of that. But if there was a proposed commercial applicant and they were at the process of pulling a building permit, they would be required to participate in this program if this ordinance moves forward. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, just because I see you chit-chatting on the side, but the thing is like I go to West Hollywood and they had a great, there's a property that has a chain link fence up. And so there was a temporary art project there for about 6 months where people could go, and they integrated the chain link fence into active participation as you walked by there. So that's what I meant by temporary.
Oh, okay, yeah. So it would be permanent art then.
Okay.
But we would still have our rotating art walk where we have our call for entry and we, consistently rotate that. So that's a great question. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
And just to expand a little on that for clarification, just to, Priya alludes to the in lieu fee would be able to be used by the Arts Commission to support, augment, and expand the rotating temporary nature. So they could do some different things with that. The permanent placement, there's actually a fairly detailed structure and process. So if a applicant, and this is going to be, they want to place it, they're going to have to go through a formal process where it requires an appraisal mechanism. It actually requires approval by the Arts Commission and, before it's placed. So that part, and then it actually has a condition that it has to be maintained by the property owner and replaced and damaged and insured. So if it's a permanent, they don't get to put something out there and then just take it away a few years later and go, oops, we're done. So I hope that answers. The Arts Commission feels there's value in supporting both programs, and what it really does is it gives the property owner the choice about whether they want to make the personal investment and own it and follow the maintenance and insurance requirements, or simply contribute funding and allow the Arts Commission to manage and program the art.
Thank you. Thank you. I love living in a community that this is what we get to talk about. So thank you very much for your work.
Councilmember Mueller, any questions or comments?
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about how the 1% came about. So my assumption is that there was some, somebody put pen to paper and decided that, best case, worst case, we might have this much over this year and that much, and so therefore 1% would be better than 1/4%. Are there any numbers like that you can share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So when the commission was initially thinking about doing this, they thought of, we did research pulling from municipalities in the area. I think I listed, Santa Fe Springs.
Yeah, no, I'm not talking about the 1% at all. I see that in tons and tons of ordinances. How much money, is there any way that we have any parameters about, how much this is going to generate? Is it going to generate $20,000 a year, $200,000 a year? Is it totally unknown?
I took that research, the numbers that they gave me, and I did building permit history. So for the years of 2012, 13, and 14, I was able to calculate what 1% of those commercial projects would be, and I'm happy to list the value. So for 2012, we had 51 commercial permits, and the 1% would be around $37,000. In 2013, really interesting. So we had 45 commercial permits, and the valuation for that, the revenue for that was $121,000, and the reason was that was when we constructed a lot of our affordable housing. So that's kind of a unique standalone project. And then in 2014, there were 24 building permits with 1% being around $11,000. So it gave us a framework to kind of look at, but it varies. And I think it speaks to what Kim was saying, that there are renovations that happen and there are...
so affordable housing, though, we could back that out. So
right,
it might be more... I think in the 20 to 40,000 range, based on a 3-year average.
Right.
Okay.
Well, but it's really impossible to calculate that, because, as I brought up, we're looking at potentially a major hotel renovation that would trigger this, which would be another spike in one-time building application fees.
What I would suggest to the council is that 3-year track record that Priya just mentioned shows the volatility in the sense that activity, or also the increase in revenue that a one-time activity. What I will point out is that in some cases, had you go back further, there might have been a spike when we had the construction, for example, of the Bardesano or the North Block. So what you're more than likely to see in Yountville's case is, my trend line would be that you're going to have some 11 to 15 average year as a baseline for just some basic renovation and upgrade of commercial property. And then when you have a significant renovation or new construction, for example, handwritten is likely to be a $3.5 to $4 million valuation. So just you can kind of see where that, so that would generate a significant uptick in that construction. But we're reaching build out. So you are going to see, I think, some, you're going to see this kind of a pattern. And I also want to point out that while the Arts Commission is focused right now on the underpass mural project, one of the things we're looking at is also we're had to put on hold basically the commissioning of public art for Town Hall just by prioritization and funding structure. So they see long-term the potential for improving the quality of the artwork and the cost. But to answer your question, I see a variable response.
Okay, well, so based on that, I have another question, and this is some information about a big lawsuit that's going against the city of Oakland right now because it may be frivolous, it may have merit. I'm not even going to go there at all. But
I will.
Okay, you can. We can talk about that in a minute. But so my question is, even if you're going to say it doesn't have merit, I know that so that the onus isn't 100% on the businesses. We do add value to this art. And so is there any way we can include in the ordinance our contribution, whether it's calculated based on staff time or some of the other donations that the town itself, the taxpayers, make to this, so it's not 100% based? I mean, we could still leave this number if we all agree, but that we're also can say that it does come from general fund taxpayer money as well as the businesses.
Well, the legal basis, just before getting into the lawsuit, the legal basis for the fee is, as Steve mentioned, it's an impact fee. So essentially, what we're saying is that the commercial development is impacting the town to some degree in an aesthetically negative way, and that we need to offset that with some sort of a beautification, with an aesthetic improvement, which would be public art. And the developer has the option to do it themselves or to contribute to the town's production of that same aesthetic offset. The trick, of course, with all impact fees is establishing some sort of a proportionality and a connection between what we're asking and what the impact is. The 1% is a fairly common evaluation. It's obviously nearly impossible to exactly determine what the aesthetic impact of a commercial development is. A traffic impact is fairly easy to quantify. An aesthetic one is much more difficult. So the 1% number is something that has been, over several decades, developed by many municipalities, and it has withstood several legal challenges in California courts. So it's generally accepted as a rough approximation, a fair approximation of the type of impact a commercial development can have. You could set that number in other places. You could have it be 0.5%. You might even, if you made findings to this effect, set it higher at 2%. The key is that you're making a determination as a legislative body that a commercial impact is going to be roughly such and such amount, and you need that proportionate amount of offset. If you want to supplement that with town general fund dollars, you absolutely can do that.
No, I'm not saying in addition to. Aren't we already doing that? That we just need to specify and add that information so that if we ever were challenged, we could say, well, we're already doing that. It's like Steve's looking for.
Well, we have budgeted support for the Arts Commission.
And
it's
that too.
Very public and available to any challenge.
I think we're talking about different but related things. And what's important for purposes of the public art ordinance, and I'd prefer to refer to it as an ordinance which contains a fee or a public art requirement, is that it's really about what the developer is doing both in its commercial capacity and then to offset that impact. What the town does in addition to that or separate from that really has nothing to do with what the developer is doing. So I think the two are really quite separate. So the fact that the town has a vibrant art community and supports public art to a large degree is just sort of distinct from the impact a developer has, and therefore the responsibility the developer has to offset their own impact. I don't see how I guess my answer to the question is I don't see how the town's efforts are going to change the outcome of a similar type of lawsuit were it to happen here.
Okay.
Can you address so that people
Yes,
understand
yes.
the Oakland lawsuit just very briefly?
So this is a lawsuit filed by the Building Industry Association against the City of Oakland. The City of Oakland's ordinance is different from the one proposed here, but for purposes of the lawsuit, likely to be roughly equivalent. It also has a public art requirement and an in lieu fee. I believe it also applies to residential, which is different from Yountville's proposed ordinance, but probably irrelevant for purposes of their claims. The Building Industry Association makes two legal arguments in their complaint. The first is that this is a taking under the Fifth Amendment, that it's an exaction of private property for public purpose that is unrelated to an impact. The second is that it's compelled First Amendment speech. Both of these issues have been resolved in the California courts in favor of ordinances precisely like the one that's being proposed here. This is a lawsuit in federal district court where it has not been raised before. So we're all interested to see if the federal district court will come to a different conclusion than the California Supreme Court. Most of us that watch these things think that that's unlikely. But you never know. The courts do what they do. But in California, it's well settled that this is a permissible ordinance under both the Fifth and First Amendment. So to address the Fifth Amendment issue, the developer has a choice to either use their property for public art or not. There's no compulsion there, or to pay the fee. And there is a relationship and a proportionate relationship between the impact that they create with their development and the aesthetic requirements of the municipality. It's all well settled. It goes back decades. With respect to the First Amendment, nobody's requiring them to participate in government speech or to say something with their art in particular. Just some sort of art is required. So there's really no First Amendment issue that I can see. I think it's likely that the case won't go very far, but again, like I said, you never know. So we are watching those the developments of that case closely. It goes to trial in September. We'll know more then. But I don't think you necessarily need to hold off on this pending the outcome of that case. In the next couple years, if the Ninth Circuit decides something radically different from what California law has said for many decades now, we would update the town and adjust the ordinance accordingly. But for now, you're on pretty solid legal ground.
Is there any legal position based on all of that that addresses residential? And is there the ability to legally distinct between commercial and residential impacts?
Sure. And I think it's reasonable, especially here, that a commercial development is very different from a residential development. The key really is providing the choice of installing the art or paying the fee. As long as you have that choice element involved and you have a proportionality with respect to the impacts, those are the two important things to look at.
Okay.
So it has nothing, so it doesn't help us in any way by perhaps fending off a lawsuit that we're not saying that only businesses are contributing to this, because in fact, the town through its general fund also does make contributions. So that doesn't, okay.
No, they're
really
different. And in this case, I think Yountville's peculiar situation is important to note for the record, that what I think is important to the town is the impact from the perspective of its central commercial areas and where tourists tend to congregate and where business tends to benefit the most and the town benefits the most from this sort of an aesthetic improvement. That's all the commercial development impacts that area. So a residential development is much less likely to have that sort of impact as a commercial one will. RH is going to have a huge aesthetic impact on the area, for better or worse. Whereas somebody renovating their detached structure somewhere in the Washington Park neighborhood, much less likely to have that sort of an impact that will negatively affect the town. So from the town's perspective and interests, I think that this particular distinction makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Councilmember Dornbecker?
Does it have any bearing on it that, from what I understood from the presentation, the Arts Commission would have to approve the art that was being installed by the owner of the property? Does that have any bearing on First Amendment or?
It probably has some bearing. I don't think that we're in trouble there because the the requirement of approval is really content neutral, and there are some sort of loose standards to how they're going to evaluate the art projects. It's mainly about the cost of the project and whether it's a permanent structure and whether it's suitable for the site. But I don't see any significant First Amendment issue there.
I think there have been some learnings from what happened down in the city of Napa with their not kind of pre-vetting some of the displays that were being proposed. It came kind of after the fact, I think, as best I could tell. But
if you wanted to really nail it down, it wouldn't be crazy to administratively, for example, create very specific guidelines and structures for how the commission can evaluate the art and for specific things that can and can't be allowed on a content neutral basis. That wouldn't be a bad idea if you were concerned about specific issues.
I don't support that idea at all, to be perfectly honest. I speak for, I think, the commission members that this reeks of the sign ordinance and the issue of what we can and can't control from an aesthetic versus a content issue, that we have our commission here for the very reason of evaluating the appropriateness of the art. My only thought was that it talks about placement. I'm assuming that qualifies for all mediums. So if this is a painted mural, if this is a landscape element that qualifies under the terms of the ordinance, that it doesn't have to be a sculpture.
That's right. So it could take a lot of different forms, and I think the commission probably couldn't exercise what you might consider to be a censorship role. But it could say, for example, that stapling a couple of crayon drawings to the side of your building doesn't meet the standards that the ordinance is intended
Well, the valuation of that building would be rather low.
Right. Well, but you can also pay the difference in a fee. But that, I think, is what the commission's role is going to be, is to evaluate sort of the structure, the location, whether it's accessible to the public, again, and the accessibility, that term should be clarified to mean visibility. You don't have to allow the public onto your land. You just have to be able to see it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what the commission's really getting at.
Right. Councilmember Dornbecker, another.
And just a follow-up is that I didn't notice whether or not content neutral was, mentioned by that term in the ordinance. Would it be worth putting that in?
Let's take a look and see what. Even if it's not listed, those decisions will affect how the commission does its work. But to add it in would not be necessarily a bad idea. Let's take a look and see what it tells us.
Don't you still have to determine what the term content neutral actually means when evaluating any particular?
Yeah. The language in Section A refers to aesthetic quality and harmony with the proposed project and the public accessibility.
There we go.
So perhaps what we want to do is strike accessibility and replace with visibility.
Well, accessibility to me sounds like a legal term that is all-inclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, and elsewhere in the ordinance we say accessible and visible to the public, and that's really what accessible means here.
I'm just going to say that I have faith in the language that you've presented and the diligence that's gone into crafting the ordinance. So to wordsmith it to that level, I think, may not be necessary. If you feel like the language is legally appropriate, that's okay with me.
I think it is. I think adding it, though, wouldn't hurt anything either.
It's right above it.
It can only make it
D,
better.
though.
I'm sorry?
It's right above it in D.
Right. That's what throughout the ordinance, accessible and visible are married together.
I'm going to jump forward and ask if there's a motion to be had by the,
Yes.
the council that seems to be in support of this ordinance.
I would like to make a motion that we approve ordinance number 16-449, an ordinance of the town of Yountville adding chapter 17.177 public art program to the Yountville Municipal Code.
Is there a second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No, that passes unanimously, so congratulations. What I would also like to say, again, I would like to commend, because I was there to see some of and hear some of those very early meetings and conversations, and knowing how apprehensive some of you and others that were before you were about creating structure. And I appreciate the fact that while maybe begrudgingly you have embraced the structure, because as Steve and I were trying to convey, this can really help move the Arts Commission forward. It already has. It will continue. So thank you for all the work. Priya, thank you also for all the work that you did to put this together. And this is just going to mean even better things for Yountville. So kudos to you. And we can send Olivia back to tell the rest of the county that we've stepped up to the plate as well. Already.
Oh, great.
Excellent. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
We have one other, I believe, brief public hearing about, and thank you for representing the Napa Valley Performing Arts Center at Lincoln Theater.
We're a fan of art.
Yeah. Next up is a review and consideration of new fees for fiscal 16-17.
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and Council. I have
Wait a minute, you're throwing your voice.
I know,
I'm looking over here.
I'm over here. So I have a brief item for you. You might recall that in the past, as a council, you've adopted a full and complete master fee schedule. What we've learned is that you actually have administratively given us that authority to update the master fee schedule on an annual basis offline, so at the staff level. So we're doing that. But what we are required to do, as we've done with like the art impact fee, is we are required to come to you with new fees as they arise and request your approval, and you've done that throughout the year. So the purpose of this report is to provide you a summary of really 2 new fees that you've yet to adopt, and a reiteration of 1 fee that you already adopted. And then an update on the park and recreation fees that are going up by a bit more than the standard 3%. So before you tonight is a fee for the electrical vehicle charging station, which is out in front of town council, the town hall. And the proposed fee is 32 cents per kilowatt hour. The employee parking management fee for the program that was developed under the planning department, annual employee parking management fees and rent $1,500, and annual vehicle registration fee per vehicle $50. And of course, as you've already recently approved the vacant storefront window display, you've already adopted that one for $1,200 for the application review fee and $250 for the monthly monitoring fee. And then your other appended Exhibit B is a summary of the proposed park and recreation fees, which are going up by 5% as opposed to the standard 3%. And those, we are actually allowed administratively to raise fees in accordance with the actual costs. And so this 5% increase is actually in line with, and we're not fully cost recovering still, but in line with expenses that are going up in park and recreation related to minimum wage increases and the like. So as I said, it's really 2 fees that are before you tonight for approval, and then a summary of what you already approved, plus a review of the recreation fees.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if you've got any questions, we can go into more detail, but in the interest of time, I kept it brief, as you said.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councilmember Dornbecker?
I did have a question about the rental fees for the Heritage Room. A few years ago, the local rental fee was $70 for the full rental fee, and it's gone up quite a bit, and it's a minimum of 2 hours. And I think if they're also charged for security, cleaning, and other costs, what does the rental fee, why does it have to be so high? That's my question.
So I'm going to defer to Sam as our Park and Rec Director.
Do we not charge for the security and cleaning costs?
We do. So all of the fees that you see there are per hour, and just for sake of the fact that we have to call out staff and do all of that, it is a 2-hour rental minimum. The fees for residents, I don't recall ever being $70 a day, but we've only really increased them every other year at CPI, and so it is only a 5% increase. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not, but every rental is different, so it's based on the number of hours you're there. There are base fees. The cleaning fee is something that is directly charged to them at the exact dollar amount that we're charged from the custodial company. Security is only required if they have alcohol, and that's the same fee that we are charged by the security company. And so I don't think the town wants to take those fees on as something that the town's taxpayers should be responsible for. The renter, in my opinion, really should be responsible for those fees. Does that answer your question?
Are the local and nonprofit rates based on recouping costs or on the commercial rates?
So we're not recouping full costs with these rates at all?
No.
So the cost recovery, the community center, the amount of money that the actual rental recovers is about 37%. And so we are not recovering our cost of operating the center from the rental. The local rate, the resident rate, is still significantly lower than, say, a commercial rate. So we have those tiers, with the resident rate being the least of those tiers. But it's still not totally cost recovery.
All right.
Makes sense.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilmember Durham?
Yeah, just real quick. So someone pulls up to the charging station and they put their credit card in? I haven't looked at it.
Yes, there's some technology there that allows us to set the rate, and you can put your credit card in. There will be, as soon as you allow this fee to exist. Currently, there isn't, but we have technology in place to do it.
I can actually clarify and provide some illustration.
Don't you have to recuse your vehicle from this conversation?
Well, I will point out one of the things we've had from a staff standpoint is the fact that part of the program, and this brings up a great question, because in order to actually use the machine, regardless, you have to have a subscription to that particular service, or you can't actually access. So you have to activate an account. Early on in the state's history, the state decided to support the electric vehicle by encouraging grants. And now what is happening is, especially many local governments have done that. And now that we're seeing that, we also have to be aware of a gift of public funds. So now that those things are going forward. So for me, it's equally important as the driver of a plug-in hybrid that will charge at the town stations. We want to make that available, and we've put in the nominal cost recovery. But if you do want to use the charge point charging system, you need to get a subscription and a membership. And much like the Fast Pass program, they put your credit card on file, and then you will pull down and use based on an account basis. And most of the devices in the Bay Area are tied into the charge point system, including those operated by the Napa Valley Transportation Authority, which also charges a fee. A number of other cities. We're sort of on a periphery. Many of the East Bay, San Francisco, and Peninsula cities have moved into charging, and we're simply coming into that.
So there's a Tesla charger and a general charger out there?
Two different things. There's a Tesla, again, Tesla offers their drivers a dedicated Tesla system where only Tesla can use it, and they're a supercharge. Right. A Tesla driver can use the charge point system, and many of them have the account. And on a regular basis, we probably have a half dozen Teslas that are circulating and using this particular device on a regular basis, as well as some Chevy Volts and Nissan Leafs.
So are those the only two chargers in the town?
We have them at the community center as well. We have two.
And you're charging there too?
In the rear parking lot.
And you're charging the people to access it as well?
We don't charge for the access. It's only, we set the rate, they put the system in, so it'll be...
But that's what I mean. Just like going to the gas station and putting my credit card in. They're putting their credit card in at the community center and here?
No, you actually have to register with the charge point system. The charge point system will give you a remote app or a card. And then the card, you go to the device or you use your app beam. You do not have a swipe or a credit card. We have
prepaid.
nothing to do with that. So it draws down from the prepaid account. That's correct.
All right.
Like a phone card.
Yes.
And that's just the way that system
Yes,
operates.
Yeah, ultimately, it charges to something, yes, from an account that you set up, but yes.
Any other questions? I see one member of the public. I'll open the public hearing and invite that member of the public. I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and invite further discussion or action by the council. Is there any further discussion? Is there action to be had?
Make a motion to approve resolution number 16-3334, adopting new fees for fiscal year 2016/17.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That is unanimous. Thank you. And thank you for all the research and finding the appropriate fees to cover at least some of the costs the town is incurring. Okay, we're going to move ahead to our administrative item, considering adoption of a long-term lease with Hotel Yountville regarding parking lot construction and maintenance down south of the south end of Veterans Memorial Park.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I'm going to attempt to be brief. The staff report outlines the general consideration and framework. And with the ad hoc committee's direction, based on the feedback previously given, by the council, they negotiated the potential terms for the lease structure. Consistent with those terms, they've negotiated that. We've arrived at a legally acceptable format. Key elements that I think you want to be aware of in the lease structure is that it will require the employee registration, so it's tied to the Hotel Yountville use application. They will be required to be part of the employee management program, and that Hotel Yountville will have to pay all costs associated with the design and construction of the parking lot facility, including utility undergrounding and lighting. Such design approval is subject to the town approval. It's in a term of 30 years with an opportunity for extensions. The parking lot would be a joint public-private use with 20 spaces closest to Veterans Memorial Park open to first-come, first-served public parking, with the remaining spaces being restricted to hotel employees. Another important consideration that's tied to their use is that under their employee parking management plan, their hotel employees would not be allowed to park on Washington Street between Oak Circle and Champaign. So it's an additional level of enforcement mechanism to ensure that the public parking adjacent to the park is available for use by park goers.
And just very quickly, we're anticipating as many as, 8 or 9 or more spaces along Washington Street, south of Champaign, at the new, what would be a new sidewalk.
That's correct, as you go down where the construction would be. So there's that. In addition, Hotel Yountville would be responsible to pay the town an annual maintenance fee of $10,000 per year, indexed with a CPI adjustment going forward, so that the town has a funding structure to pay for the annual maintenance, garbage, lighting, and builds up a dedicated reserve fund for the restriping and the occasional slurry seal and pavement maintenance that will be occurred. And this was important. It also establishes a process for assignment of lease should Hotel Yountville sell the property. And as I mentioned, probably and will mention again, the full implementation of the rather detailed employee parking management plan. Again, as the council knows, you provided some pretty firm negotiating direction to your ad hoc committee, and over a several month period, they were able to put together the deal points, and then staff was able to work with George Altamira Sr. and his legal team with a little reinforcement from the ad hoc committee, and I think we've crafted together the agreement based on the principles that the council had provided. Again, this is a discretionary use, but it is one that I think is consistent with providing a level of a public-private partnership and also allowing hopefully one of our businesses to fully maximize to its potential in a way that has the town is taking a slightly different approach towards how to be a partner in trying to make sure that the impact often associated with employee parking does not reach into the neighborhood. So it's a little bit out of the box thinking in some regards, but again, I think reflects this council's thoughtful but yet protective nature of trying to manage a balance between business and residential. With that,
some of these conditions are replicated in the efforts you're making at the north end of town with applying parking management and construction of spaces and maintenance of spaces to uses.
I will just say that there are some property owners watching this, and if there is some opportunity, I would anticipate that I may have a few phone calls tomorrow morning.
Okay. With that, I don't know if Councilmember Durham at this point wants to add anything to the staff report as a member of the ad hoc committee.
I would just add that we had quite extensive discussions, and there were points that were brought up that were excuse me that were deemed not possible at all by the ad hoc committee, so they had to revisit their thoughts. So a lot of discussion did go into this lease as well.
And I would just add to that one of our principal concerns was retaining the public benefit to this while creating opportunities, one, for the hotel to satisfy the conditions we've already approved for their public operations, and but principally protecting the interests we have in having park renters, residents able to use not only what would be the new parking lot, but also the spaces along Washington that typically at any given day you see are filled by hotel employees that at 5 o'clock when we're going in for bocce, all the cars leave when the shift changes. But those spaces have been taken out of our inventory for visitors. So I think it's a strong proposal. But questions from Councilmember Mueller?
I'm just trying to get the whole chicken and the egg thing kind of straightened out here. So once we approve this, hopefully Mr. Altamura will sign it. But that would preclude us, this has to happen first before we can go back and revisit the approval of the restaurant, the spa, et cetera. And that's still short a few spaces even with this in place. Is that correct?
No, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this would satisfy the conditions we put on the opening to the public of the lobby bar, the restaurant, and the spa uses.
Correct.
Okay, so if we do this, do they still have to come back for final approval of that?
No.
Or by
That's
signing
already been
this,
given.
okay, so by signing this, then all the other things that we talked about are automatically a go.
The answer I want to hear is exactly when does this trigger? Is this build out of the parking lot? Is this building permit filing?
Actually, all very good questions. Your approval of opening to the public was predicated on them meeting the parking. So until they build the parking, they do not get to open to the public. So this is a necessary step because they did not have to meet their parking necessarily by using this option. They could have found parking another way. So they do not get to open to the public until such time as the public parking or their parking, this project is met. So I think they will be incentivized to conclude the agreement and move forward post haste.
So they don't have to build anything.
Yes.
They have to build this, but the uses that they want to open to the public are all, in the restaurant are all, in the spa are all built.
They're pre-approved, but they can't open to the public until they have satisfied the conditions of the building and
They may have
design
some very
abilities.
minor, interior modification, but all of those uses and everything.
So as soon
that-
as this is signed and built, then
I think there might be an intermediate step in the parking management plan, right? So this is part of that plan, but it has to be signed off by your planning director and staff.
the parking management plan that we talked about.
I
Okay.
think the main point to be made, if I'm understanding your question, is this has to be built and available for use before they can open the spaces, the areas of operation that have been pre-approved for public use pending their parking
Correct.
management plan.
As well as
satisfaction.
complying with all of the other conditions of approval, too.
Right.
Right, okay.
That's right.
Sets everything in motion to occur.
So this is part of the plan, which is part of the conditions you imposed.
That's the answer.
All
is
of
it?
which must
Okay.
be satisfied for them to continue to operate.
Okay. So the public will know when they see a parking lot that we're going to be really close to the other things.
That's right.
All right.
Any other questions? No questions from the public, or yes, questions from the public?
Actually, I do have
Okay. Are you putting your lawyer hat on, or your member of the public hat?
Member of the public hat. Hi, Carrie Dorman. So I have two sort of ways I want to look at it tonight, conceptually and then some of the specific lease terms, and not hopefully to get into wordsmithing, but just questions about the impact of the lease. So conceptually, my math is they needed 95 original spaces, they needed 55 spaces for the new use, which makes 150. They're going to end up with 145, which is 89 on-site, 47, the total of the new lot, and 8 on Champaign. So they're still 5 spaces short. So I just wanted someone to maybe confirm my math on that.
Well, 47 is an approximation, first of all, because it has not been designed. That's an estimate. And there's also parking that will be created on Washington Street that will be available to their employees. I believe, Steve, tell me if I'm wrong. I thought it was something like estimating 8 or 9 spaces.
And I counted those, 8 on Champaign.
No, that's not
8
Champaign.
on South
Street.
Washington.
In addition to Champaign, there will be 8 more on Washington.
Where there is not a sidewalk and curb now, there will be a sidewalk and curb with additional T's along Washington Street. So it just like there is now a sidewalk on the east side between the church and Champaign, there is no sidewalk on the west side. There will be. And so there will be an extension of parking spaces there that is created by this parking lot.
Okay,
And
great.
if I'm
So
not-
that puts them over.
Right, and if I'm not mistaken, their total combination, they also have a requirement for 10 additional spaces on site, if I'm not mistaken, right, in their existing.
It's not to build out 10 additional spaces, but that 10 management employees park on site. In
So it's a
existing
cumulative kind of number of things we're doing to try to.
Okay, so, well, if my total is 145 and then I add 8, I get 153. So that's more than the requirement. And that was my concern because of our parking issues. And then I just wanted clarification. I believe that Steve said prohibited employee parking zones would be between Oak Circle and Champaign.
That's correct.
Okay, and I think just the, that's a change from the original staff report back in January, because it was going to be California and Champaign, according to that staff report. So I just wondered.
Maybe that we're just getting a little
It's not
tighter
for you to
on-
respond right
Yep.
now, I understand, I'm just raising that. My other issue on the parking is, as I read the lease, none of it has to be public parking. All 47 spaces, or 49, or ever how many it turns out to be, can be taken by hotel employees and/or hotel guests, or guests of the spa or the Y Bar. And again, I know you don't have to respond to me, I just raised that, so it doesn't seem like we're getting a net gain of public parking spaces. On the lease itself, the 30-year term,
That isn't really accurate.
okay.
You could argue that with every space along any public street then to say that employees, yes, they are allowed to park there. It is clear in the management plan that the priority is to be in the designated spaces. Now,
Right.
are they explicitly prohibited from parking in any public spaces? No, it's illegal to do that. But we are requiring that they prioritize their parking in these designated areas.
And then if they have employee overflow, it comes into the 20 or so public spaces.
Or places along Washington Street that aren't
Right.
already prohibited.
Okay, so then the 30-year term says tenant has option to renew, and I'm just wondering if the town has any say-so about not being able to renew that. Can we say no to the renewal? And as far as the construction, I understand that the hotel is going to build it, and I wondered if we would be the beneficiaries of any warranties or construction benefits that would come with that, if there could be an assignment of warranties. I didn't know if that was mentioned in the lease or if that is typical. I also didn't see anything in the lease about damage to property during the term. It says they have to return it to us in as good or better condition, wear and tear accepted. So I wondered about damages, who is responsible. And if the 10,000, I know Steve everybody's run the numbers to get to 10,000. If there is some sort of extraordinary event, should the lease cover that? If there's something that would go beyond the 10,000, should the lease look at that? And then on the assignment, I understand that it shall not be assigned except in conjunction with simultaneous assignment and transfer of the property. But the paragraph also has some language in there about proposed assignment, transfer, or sublet. So I didn't know if that had been left from a previous draft or if we really meant it would only be with the transfer of the property. And those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, I'll invite our town attorney, who meticulously went over at least several, if not all, of the conditions you referenced, so that they would be legal and appropriate.
Sure. So let me just finish my notes on the last of those. The first question was as to the option to renew, and it's correct, and this was part of the negotiation, that the tenant has the option, and the option means that they get to exercise it or not. So under the current terms, as negotiated, the town, for the additional 10-year period, cannot reject the renewal.
And the thinking, I'll speak for myself, and Councilmember Durham can speak for himself, thinking was it would be an unfair taking after 30 years of operation that a future council could say, you know what, we don't want you to have that parking lot after all, we want to take it back, and that would put them in violation of their conditions of use and operations, and that seemed excessive.
Correct.
The question about assignment of warranties is not mentioned in the lease. It could be, I suppose, but the provisions of the lease require, as the second or the next, which would be the third question raised, is that the condition of the property be maintained in a certain way up to town standards and returned to the town in that condition or better. So to the extent that there are warranties that need to be invoked in order to remedy a defect in construction or materials or some sort of a damage, which was the third question, to my mind that wraps in the idea of returning the property in the condition to which it's constructed initially and approved to town standards. You could add additional language to this effect, but effectively that's what you're already getting out of the lease, is the construction at a certain level and then it maintained in that level.
And I'm satisfied with the language as it's presented. I don't know if Councilmember Durham has any other thought on that.
No.
And as for the assignment, I'm not sure I fully understood the question, so if I don't answer it correctly, I invite Carrie to let me know. But basically, the idea behind the assignment clause is that it can be assigned to a person or entity which acquires the hotel, and in connection with that acquiring of the hotel property, and the town has some ability to not consent to that assignment but can't unreasonably withhold it. So that's, I think, a triple negative at least. But essentially, we have to approve it if it's a reasonable assignment of the hotel property or in connection with that assignment. And the theory here being that the parking lot is intended, obviously, to satisfy conditions of the use on the hotel property, so the owner needs to be able to transfer the two together. But we wanted to make sure that the parking lot itself cannot be assigned separately, so that suddenly the hotel decides it doesn't need to be open to the public, or it doesn't need those parking spaces, and then it sells it for separate commercial gain, or assigns the lease, rather. I think that addressed the question, but I'm not positive.
Okay.
But that was the intention of the lease, was to restrict the assignment.
And restrict the use to a parking lot?
Yes.
Not storage pods or anything else?
So separate terms in the lease restrict the use of the parking lot for parking and not for other purposes, such as storage or temporary structures, or even selling fireworks, or small concert venues. Anything you can imagine someone might want to set up in a parking lot, even a farmer's market, would not be allowed under the lease.
Food trucks. So how long is this offer good for? When do they have to sign and do something by?
You could revoke the offer. So the problem, of course, is that the council acts as a whole, so that once you approve the lease, until you vote to bring it back, they can accept it and sign it.
So 8 months from now, if nothing's happened, we can revoke it?
Oh, so if they accept and they sign it...
No, if nothing happens, if they don't sign it.
Oh, absolutely nothing.
Okay.
Okay. Sure, I think you could, yeah.
Okay.
Or even 2 weeks. As a council, you could do that, yes. But that's if they say nothing.
It's more than a strong likelihood that they see the need to have a valid parking management plan for the operation of the hotel.
If they sign it, we've got no issue.
Just from personal observation, it seemed to me that the other side of this negotiation was mostly concerned that it wouldn't happen fast enough.
Okay.
So
let's hope that...
I expect them to respond quickly.
Two of us called in for a conference call because they demanded it at early meeting.
Requested.
Requested. I'm not a lawyer, so.
Okay.
So they requested an early meeting to get moving on it.
Okay.
Just so you know.
I have a question.
Yes, Councilmember Dornbecker?
Well, so does the lease allow them to sublet the parking lot? No.
Mm-mm.
So that is specifically said in the lease?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
They can't offer another business to use it as their parking management plan.
Right.
For example, they have to use it to satisfy their own.
Mm-hmm.
So, without any members of the public having no more members of the public, is there final action to be taken by the council? Or any additional questions? I think we've had our questions, so is there action? Councilmember Durham?
I move that we adopt Resolution 16-3335, approving a long-term lease with Hotel Yountville, located at 6462 Washington Street, APN 036-090-26 and 036-090-038, to construct a joint use, public and private, to allow for Veterans Memorial Park parking and hotel employee parking lot.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I just noticed that we're getting late in the hour, later than I realized. But thank you all very much, and I appreciate staff's time, our town attorney, town manager, Councilmember Durham, for all the additional time that was put into the negotiations. I also want to recognize George Altamira Sr. and Chuck Mybuyer for their their time and efforts in reasonable negotiation with this as well. So with that, we're going to move forward to informational reports. We have updates on Hopper Creek flood control and/or Oak Circle.
We do, Mr. Mayor. This evening, I'm happy to say that the Hopper Creek project is showing signs of of closing very strongly, as most of you have probably noticed. Lots of sidewalk has been poured on the south side of the project. PG&E did the work as they promised on Monday, and were complete by the end of the day on Monday, late Monday evening, around 4 o'clock. And concrete will be the main feature that will be poured this week, with the completion of, hopefully the completion of the sidewalks, curb and gutter, some additional handicap ramp on the north side of the street, down near Heritage, across the street from Heritage, from the new handicap ramp on Heritage, and additional landscaping work will also continue as the project nears completion, with paving scheduled for hopefully sometime next week.
And street lamps?
Couple? Yep, 4 actually. The foundations have been poured, and the contractor has relayed their intentions to place the poles this week. So we should see those new street lights standing up by the end of this week, weather permitting.
Do those have shields on the south side?
They do not, but the LED, we've had that question from a couple of different people. What we've noticed is the comments, once the lights are in place, tend to be not as concerned. The people who made the comments tend to not be as concerned with the light, mainly because the LED tends to shine in a way that the light is more focused down towards the ground and the travelway, and less spill into areas that we weren't trying to light. So should that need occur, we do have the ability to put on some limited shielding to help kind of refocus.
And obviously the location that you've determined is to minimize any light spillage to anyone's properties.
We actually moved one light specifically. Well, we had a couple of different issues with it, but one of the issues was because we thought it would be a little bit more of an issue with the homeowner, so we relocated a little bit. So we have definitely tried to do that in cases where we could.
Realizing in any brand new condition, there's going to be some impact for a period of time as everyone adjusts.
We do realize that, and I will say that with some of the newer streetlights that we placed, we have had some concern. And once those lights have been in place for a short period of time, we have noticed that the concern kind of is either negated or completely just, it's not a concern. That the light is not that, it's not the same as the old style lights.
Right. And did I correctly hear you say that the Fennell resurfacing, let me not say, what is the projected timeline for the Fennell resurfacing of the entire street?
We're working with the contractor right now to establish when they're going to be on site. We're hoping we'll see them as early as the middle of next week for grinding, with paving following shortly after that.
Any other questions about this update?
And they'll also do that little section on, there's also a little section on Vista.
That's correct, where they tied into that little piece of sewer there. So we're going to pave sidewalk to sidewalk or curb to curb on that little section of Vista, and then reconstruct half of the street on Fennell with a bit of a grind and an overlay on the north side of the street.
And the
complete overlay on
the completion of the landscaping and final stretch of the sidewalk reconstruction is our responsibility, not
no. It's actually part of the project.
That is part of the project.
It's ongoing. They're starting to. They actually were able. We were talking with the superintendent today. They were able to obtain some of the overburden from the Oak Circle Park. The contractor was looking to try to get that removed, and the contractor on Fennell was happy to use that because it's great material for the landscaping that they need to fill in between the sidewalk and the fence on Fennell. So that's a part of the project.
Good. And for the criticism I've been giving PG&E, I think absolutely appropriately, the entry into Girardi Place was well done.
we think it came out well. The residents seem to be very happy with it, and I will say that the contractor who has represented PG&E for the paving and the concrete has performed admirably. We completely agree.
Oak Circle?
Oak Circle Park is also moving right along. So they have finished pouring the majority of the concrete in the park proper. They have finished up the pavers, and we anticipate that with tomorrow, some of the majority of the plants are going to arrive on site. They're going to begin placing the plants, and what you're going to see this week is the contractor beginning to excavate the parking lot area with some curb and gutter being installed prior to the paving. That project should close out rather quickly too. Within the next 2 or 3 weeks, that park should be complete. What you see on the screen there is a picture that we took from the bucket truck as we were removing a street light.
I knew it was the bucket truck.
Yeah, I thought that was a great shot. So we're placing a new street light as a part of the Oak Circle Hopper Creek project. We're also placing a new street light as a part of the Oak Circle Park project. So 2 new street lights going in those locations, and more to follow on Oak Circle to remove those wooden poles that have seen their better days. So
we have some of those in Heritage too.
What's the additional new parking count at this point?
It's going to be nine additional parking slots, with one of them being an ADA accessible slot.
And those are diagonal?
They'll be head in.
Head in. Okay. Any other questions on that update, or is that it for that update?
I do.
Councilmember Dornbecker?
So can you sort of indicate, looking at that photo, how the cars will be positioned and to where? Will that end where it seems to come out in a little V in the middle of the wooden fence down there?
So where the light pole is now, that's going to be about the beginning of where the head-in parking is going to be. And then as you come down towards the bottom of the screen, kind of about where that cone is, just past where that cone is, that's about where the parking is going to end. So it's going to be about roughly 9. It's actually going to be 9 parking slots.
They would be perpendicular to the existing curb right there.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay. Thank you for that update.
You bet. Thank you.
Okay, what do we have next? We have meeting reports. No report from flood control. Napa Valley Transportation Authority meets tomorrow. So I'll have reported our next meeting. I believe no meeting from Upper Valley Waste Management. That was canceled, correct?
No, just for the event yesterday.
All right. We'll get to reports and announcements. I'll count that as a report and announcement about our visit to the Presidio for the State Historic Registry, or State Historic
National
Resources Commission, for consideration of this facility as a joining the National Registry. Sandra, did you want to maybe just tell everybody what happened?
Well, it's exciting. They were holding an annual meeting, or their quarterly meeting, down in the Presidio, and they approved the town hall project, or the town hall addition to the National Register of Historic Places, which automatically also listed on the state registry. So it's an exciting honor.
Yeah. And I attended along with our ad hoc committee members, Dornbecker and Moeller and Sandra and Steve Rogers. And we were very well attended, and we also did run into some of our Napa County landmarks co-workers. I was trying to think of that term. Supporters, and so it was good to see that they were also participating down there at that workshop. So that's a great honor for all the work that was put into preserving the old grammar school.
And we will work now on the appropriate historic registration, identification, signage, and continuation of the historic interpretive panels. So I anticipate we'll be working on those 2 items.
I did want to just very quickly recognize once again our Yountville Arts Commission and all the volunteers and staff that performed beautifully for another successful 4th annual Art Sip and Stroll. Ordering the weather was very well done also. Councilmember Dornbecker?
I just wanted to report on the on April 13th, the annual luncheon for the Yountville Women Veterans, and at that luncheon, we did deliver certificates to each of the 27 World War II women veterans who were in attendance, and they also received certificates from everyone from Congressman Thompson, State Senator Lois Wolk, State Assembly Member Dodd, and our County Supervisor Diane Dillon, and they were very thrilled with the attention. And a lady at that luncheon told me that she was thrilled because her family was going to think that she was important. So it made my day. Anyway, it was a great event.
I was just confirming on the calendar, I wanted to make sure to mention the Go Green workshop that is coming up on April 30th.
That's correct.
At 2 o'clock in the Yountville Community Center. So that is just around the corner.
And my event this Friday, Shredded Day, 2 to 4. Anything with a cord and anything you want shredded. Show up at West America Bank and we'll be there to help you out.
Any other reports or announcements? Seeing none, we're barely getting in under the 10 o'clock timeline, but we will. See no closed sessions necessary, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn to a regular meeting on Tuesday, May 3rd.
Excuse me, so moved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, everyone.
That's a wrap.
Maria.
Air conditioning is
Here's the
still
hotel.
on.